Story 1.
Husband discovers wife's cheating, plans epic revenge on her and lover before completely ghosting. I am a rural fellow named Bill Carlson, holding an associate degree in animal husbandry. My lifelong ambition has been to possess my own feed store and raise a family. Upon completing junior college, I wedded my high school sweetheart, Janice, with whom I grew up and envisioned a future. She was the only girl I ever saw myself living with, a lovely brunette with a pleasing physique that endured despite bearing 2 boys. I took immense pride in her as my wife, and was prepared to do anything for her. However, Janice had one issue: she envied those who lived luxuriously. She avidly read society pages and subscribed to magazines featuring glamorous individuals. Even at the dentist's office, she pored over automobile magazines, becoming well-versed in fancy cars and designer clothing lines. She aspired for more, a desire I couldn't fulfill. I secured employment at an upscale feed store in Omaha catering to the yuppie clientele, allowing us to be nearer to the urban center while pursuing my passion. I enjoyed my work and excelled at it, providing customers with personalized service, which the company acknowledged by granting me flexible hours. Janice initially relished city life over rural living and seemed content. However, when she chose to enter the workforce, we had to resort to daycare for the kids, who didn't seem to mind. Janice landed a position at Gilbert Medical, a medical equipment firm, which she seemed to enjoy as it provided her with the opportunity to dress up and interact with non-farmers. As her career blossomed, her interest in our home life waned, leaving me to handle the majority of childcare duties, from daycare drop-offs to meal preparation and housekeeping, while she focused on laundry, ensuring her clothing remained impeccably ironed. We diligently set aside money each month with the goal of eventually purchasing my own feed store. However, despite both of us working, our savings dwindled. Daycare expenses accounted for some, but the bulk disappeared on beauty treatments, nail salon visits, and expensive clothing purchases. I struggled to comprehend how our dual incomes resulted in diminished savings. Janice refused to address the issue, growing defensive and upset whenever I broached it, so I ceased mentioning it altogether. Nonetheless, I discreetly opened another savings account to keep separate. Meanwhile, Janice began working overtime, engaging in private phone calls, becoming less attentive in our bed life, and expressing desires for a newer, fancier car, and even contemplating chest implants. It left me with no doubt that she was having an affair. Though I'm just a simple guy from the countryside, I'm not naive. Right now, I wasn't interested in salvaging the marriage. I simply wanted to sort things out and move forward before it was too late. Since I didn't socialize with her CO workers, it was tough to pinpoint anything, but I suspected if there was anything going on, it was at her workplace. I had a couple of good buddies at work, not highly educated but hard workers. Even though I was their boss, I didn't pull rank. The tasks got done without needing to micromanage. We all understood our roles and collaborated well, which fostered a positive relationship. Roy and Freddie would be important allies in my scheme. I noticed that on Wednesdays, Janice would dress up in fancy clothes and linger longer before heading to work. I thought this would be an opportune time to investigate. I briefed the guys on the situation, and they covered for me with my duties that day. I parked near the entrance of the Gilbert Medical plant lot, using the time to catch up on technical reading. Around 11 a.m., Janice left and drove to the Holiday Inn lot, parking far from her office. Shortly after, a guy arrived in a red Corvette and parked at the opposite end. Though I didn't recognize him when he stepped out, Janice followed suit, and they entered a first-floor room, number 117, using his key. My heart sank, and I felt queasy. My suspicions were confirmed. Unsure of my next move, I decided to head back to work, taking my time to plan. Before leaving, I snipped 2 of Janice's valve stems with my wire cutters out of frustration. I'm not sure why I didn't target his. The rest of the day dragged on, and I went through the motions of picking up the kids, preparing dinner, and asking Janice about her day, to which she mentioned a flat tire. One of my CO workers changed it for her, and the incident was never discussed again. The following morning, after dropping the boys off at daycare, I swung by the plant. It didn't take long to spot the red Corvette, which conveniently had a reserved parking spot with a sign. I noted the name, Ken Beam, distribution manager, whose wife also worked at Gilbert. By that afternoon, I had gathered plenty of information about Ken, including his marital status, past issues at work, and personal details. Although I had his contact info and even his SSN, I wasn't sure how to proceed. He'd been married to Amy for 8 years. We completed a productive day's work, and Roy, Freddie, and I managed to squeeze in 1 beer before I had to pick up the kids. Though uncertain about my next move, I had a feeling things would fall into place soon. Despite trying to maintain a calm and logical approach, my frustration grew daily. and occasional silent tears betrayed my inner turmoil. Feeling wounded and unable to mend myself, living with Janice became increasingly unbearable. I longed for it to be over. The following day, luck smiled on me again when I recalled that Marge Gilbert, one of my loyal customers, was married to the president of the Gilbert Medical Company. Though I hadn't met him, Marge and I had had a great rapport. I made a conscious effort to be extra friendly with Marge, exploring if our connection could be advantageous. During Marge's visit with her daughter Cindy, a vet school student, we conversed for about an hour, enjoying our interaction. I felt a twinge of guilt after she left, but it quickly passed. Over the weekend, I spent time in the garage welding. I fashioned a small piece of flat steel with 4 sharp concrete nail points attached, my initial step towards seeking revenge through annoyance. On Tuesday, while unloading an order, I appeared more subdued than usual, catching Marge's attention. She noticed my demeanor and asked what was wrong that day, expressing concern. I responded, explaining that I was dealing with some personal issues, apologizing for not being my usual self. Sensing my distress, Marge suggested we have coffee and a chat. As we sat in her kitchen, reminiscent of a magazine spread with its stainless steel and granite decor, I couldn't help but think of how Janice would admire it. Marge placed the coffee on the table and leaned in, asking how she could help me. Reluctant to burden her with my problems, I eventually opened up, realizing it might offer some relief. I confessed that I believed my wife, Janice, was being coerced into a lovemaking relationship with one of her superiors at Gilbert Medical, though I lacked evidence. Marge inquired about the basis of my suspicion, prompting me to explain the small signs I had noticed, including finding them both together at the Holiday Inn the previous week. I admitted that Janice was unaware of my knowledge and that I was unsure how to approach the topic, expressing concern about whether she felt obligated or if it was her choice. I also shared that our family life had deteriorated, with Janice seeming indifferent toward the children and me, and that she was keeping it hidden, which bothered me. Marge asked about the individual involved, and I mentioned that I suspected his name was Ken Beam, but was unsure of Janice's relationship with him or if they worked in different parts of the plant. I confessed that I had never met him. Marge offered to investigate discreetly, and after a moment of contemplation, I agreed, expressing a preference to avoid causing a scene. She assured me she would look into it and mentioned seeing me next Thursday for the oat delivery. I thanked her, and as I prepared to leave, suggested bringing the boys over so Cindy could meet them. Reflecting on the conversation, I felt the outcome exceeded my expectations. I was confident Janice wouldn't object to me taking the boys out, envisioning a good weekend ahead. The next morning, as rain poured, Janice carefully dressed for her day. I observed silently as I dropped the kids off at daycare before stopping by work, where the guys were ready to cover my morning shifts. Roy would use my truck for deliveries and log entries, which I would review later. Freddie brought his cousin's van, and we loaded a floor jack equipped with my steel plate. After ensuring all trucks were loaded, I departed for the Holiday Inn. Right on time, Janice parked in her usual spot, followed by Ken. Once they entered the room, I waited for about 10 minutes in the pouring rain. I retrieved the jack from the van and approached Ken's car. I positioned the jack under his engine block, swiftly lifting it and puncturing the oil pan with nails. Moving to the Corvette, I repeated the process on its fuel tank. Oil and gas spilled out. As I returned the jack to the van, the entire operation took less than a minute. I then disabled Janice's car once more before driving away. In my rearview mirror, I witnessed the explosion from Ken's car as I left the lot. A sense of relief washed over me. Janice arrived home from work a bit late. Without eating supper, she headed straight to bed. I spent some time with the boys, giving them a bath and tucking them in. That night, I slept on the couch. The following morning, Janice remained in bed while I got the boys ready for daycare. We had breakfast and left, but she stayed in bed without a word, and her car was absent from the driveway. Around 9 a.m., after loading all the trucks, Lieutenant John Fritz paid me a visit. He was amiable. He inquired about my work schedule from the previous day, to which I explained it consisted of routine deliveries. I then asked if he needed verification of my whereabouts, mentioning he obtained the delivery logs from the previous day. Around noon, I showed him the logs detailing each stop. He smiled and chuckled lightly, commenting on the meticulous log and asking if I maintained it daily. I offered to show logs from the past month, but he declined with a shake of his head, still smiling. Despite his demeanor, I couldn't discern whether it was positive or negative. I inquired about the reason for his visit, and after some hesitation, he explained they were investigating a car damaged at the Holiday Inn. I questioned why he involved me, and he explained my wife's car parked nearby had 2 valve stems cut, leading them to wonder if it was related to the incident. Expressing unawareness of why my wife's car was at the Holiday Inn, I asked about her connection to the damaged car, which he clarified belonged to a colleague she had a lunch meeting with at the hotel. When I asked if he spoke with the people they dined with, he admitted they couldn't recall their names. Pressing for a straightforward conversation, he leaned back, smiling, and mentioned someone named Ken Beam. I affirmed that I had never met him. He seemed to believe me, expressing a preference not to get involved in domestic matters. Offering his card, he suggested I contact him if needed and apologize for bringing the issue to my attention. As he left, I muttered about the lack of substantial information provided and the need to connect the dots. After work, upon returning home with the kids, Janice's car was in the driveway. She was casually dressed and had prepared supper, claiming she felt unwell and had called in sick. She didn't mention the previous day's events, so I didn't broach the subject. She retired early, and once again I took care of the boys and slept on the couch. The following day, she was up and preparing for work when I left with the boys for daycare. After dropping them off, I visited the doctor's office and requested an STD check. Work proceeded as usual for a Friday. Upon returning home, Janice was there once again. After dinner, I informed her that I planned to take the boys to spend the next day at one of my customers' farms. I offered her the chance to join us, fully aware she'd find an excuse to decline. She mentioned some shopping she wanted to do, and I didn't press further. Whether it was shopping or a date, the outcome remained the same. Saturday at Gilbert's ranch with Cindy and the boys was fantastic. We enjoyed the entire day together, with Marge preparing a wonderful lunch for everyone. I wish the day wouldn't end. Cindy bonded well with the boys, and they seemed to adore her. Unfortunately, Mr. Gilbert wasn't present, so I still didn't get to meet him. Marge didn't bring up our previous conversation, and it seemed Cindy was oblivious to it. Reluctantly, we had to head home. Janice showed no interest in our day when we returned. The boys attempted to share their adventures with her, but she disregarded them. Eventually, they gave up. She did inquire why I wasn't sleeping in the bed anymore. I explained that work-related stress caused me to toss and turn, and I didn't want to disturb her sleep. That was the last she mentioned it. The following week proceeded without incident. I noticed on her special day that she made no special preparations, leading me to assume the rendezvous for the day was canceled. This suited me fine, as I had plenty of work to catch up on. I visited a divorce lawyer I had heard about, receiving information handouts and brochures, including fill-in-the-blank forms that caught my interest. Everything returned to normal until the following Wednesday. She began the day with a morning shower, carefully styling her hair. She wore new black lingerie, a new perfume, and what seemed to be new shoes. I made sure she didn't catch me observing, and I hurried out with the boys. I was certain this was a date. After dropping off the boys, I swung by the plant and checked his parking spot. A new Porsche Boxster occupied his slot. I noted down the license number and hastened back to work. The guys shared my excitement about the new development. We rushed through the morning deliveries and manipulated the logs once more. I'm sure John Fritz could see through our charade, but we proceeded nonetheless. We enjoyed an extended lunch break. While Roy continued with the deliveries, Freddie picked up 2 large bottles of hydrochloric acid from the swimming pool supply store. I intended to spend lunch with John Fritz. He gave me a peculiar look when I entered his office with pulled pork sandwiches, fries, and a couple of Cokes. I greeted him and sat down across from him. He sensed something was amiss and grinned broadly. I suggested we grab lunch together and catch up on the car damage case, hoping to keep him occupied for about 2 hours. It was going to be a lengthy lunch. While I kept up a friendly demeanor, Freddie was at the Holiday Inn parking lot. He located the Boxster and meticulously poured acid over the trunk, fenders, and deck. He sliced the convertible top and poured acid over the leather seats and floor mats. The dashboard received its share of acid as well. As an extra measure, he deposited a box of mothballs in the gas tank. The nap, however, would wreak havoc on the engine if anyone attempted to start it. The remaining acid was spread across the top of the tires. Before leaving, he once again snipped the valve stems on Janice's car. It all transpired within 15 minutes. The only downside was not knowing how long they would be in the room. John and I engaged in light conversation for a while until he asked what I was up to. I casually mentioned ensuring I had a solid alibi in case something happened to Ken Beam's car that day. When John asked why that day was special, I joked about the pulled pork sandwiches being unspecial. After that, I called the daycare center and asked Carol to arrange for Janice to pick up the boys, explaining that I would be busy at work that afternoon. John chuckled about the delicious pork sandwiches. After a pause, John asked if he should call Mr. Beam and inquire about his car. I questioned why he would want to do that, and provided him with Mr. Beam's cell number and the number of the Holiday Inn room. John put the phone on speaker and dialed the hotel number. After a few rings, Ken Beam answered, breathing heavily. Detective Fritz informed him that they still had no leads on who damaged his car and inquired about his new car's whereabouts. Ken seemed surprised by the call and questioned how Detective Fritz got his number. After a brief exchange, Ken mentioned his new car was in the parking lot, and Detective Fritz heard strange noises in the background. Ken abruptly ended the call, stating he needed to get dressed and check something. John grinned at me, asking if I was satisfied. After our conversation, I returned to work. Roy had the logs in perfect condition, and Freddie had discreetly disposed of the acid bottles. That evening at home, Janice picked up the boys but remained silent, going to bed early once more. The following day, John visited me and detailed all the damage to the car, explaining that Ken's insurance was pending since the Corvette incident. The car was totaled, leaving him over $60,000 in debt. Ken insisted I was involved, despite John confirming I was with him at the time. While John naturally suspected my involvement, he couldn't prove anything, nor did he seem inclined to. As for how Janice got her tires fixed, I never inquired, and no one offered any information. Since Janice hadn't come clean about the situation, I decided it was time to put an end to it all. My STD test results came back negative. I had filled out the paperwork for the lawyer to initiate the divorce proceedings. I planned to visit the Gilberts' ranch with the boys this weekend, just in case Cindy was there. If not, we'd spend the day with Marge. The only loose end was lacking evidence of the extramarital affair. The weekend was pleasant. Cindy was present, much to the kids' delight, and we all enjoyed ourselves once more. We felt like a family again, and I missed that, as did the boys. Cindy remained unaware of the situation, but at least she didn't inquire. Before I departed, Marge assured me with a wink, saying everything would be all right. I was offered a new position about 100 miles away, offering more pay, a better job, and the option to buy into the business in a few years. It seemed perfect, except for the fact that we wouldn't be near Cindy. The following Wednesday, Janice dressed up again. I wasn't sure what kind of car her boyfriend used, but she was clearly preparing for another rendezvous with him. I assumed they were still meeting at the same place. I knew I had to take action, but I hadn't formulated a plan yet. The guys and I were brainstorming when Marge Gilbert pulled up. She signaled for me to approach and silently drove us to the plant, parking in the back. We entered through a private entrance straight to Mr. Gilbert's office. Marge facilitated introductions, and his secretary brought us coffee. We engaged in small talk for a while until I finally asked, "Did you bring me here for a reason?" Mr. Gilbert chuckled and mentioned it was time to resolve the situation. He informed me that Marge had briefed him on what was happening, and they had conducted an internal investigation. He assured me that by the end of the day, I would have all the necessary information. He apologized in advance if anything he did caused me damage. We engaged in more conversation, and Marge noticed my grin when Cindy was mentioned. I attempted to conceal it, but did a poor job. Suddenly, the phone rang, catching everyone's attention. Mr. Gilbert received an update and confirmed that everything was set. He explained that Ken and my wife were in their usual room at the Holiday Inn. Ken had driven a company vehicle there, which violated policy, so it was being brought back to the plant. Unfortunately, my wife's car had a couple of flat tires, which seemed to be a recurring occurrence. He then put the phone on speaker and dialed the room. Mr. Gilbert called Ken and informed him of the urgent need to discuss something. Ken seemed surprised and asked what the matter was and how Mr. Gilbert got his number. Mr. Gilbert brushed off the question and explained that the legal department had been alerted to a potential legal issue. He asked if there was a female employee from their company with Ken. After a moment of silence and indistinct background chatter, Ken confirmed that she was there. Mr. Gilbert asked if she was there willingly or if she was being coerced or threatened. Ken assured him that she was there of her own accord and that the relationship was consensual. Mr. Gilbert expressed appreciation for Ken's honesty on the sensitive issue and stated that they would prepare a statement to confirm the consensual nature of the relationship. He then requested to speak with the young lady. After some back noise, Janice came on the line and asked how she could assist him. Mr. Gilbert asked if Ken coerced or threatened her to accompany him there. Janice confirmed to Mr. Gilbert that Ken hadn't threatened her and the relationship was consensual. Mr. Gilbert expressed relief and informed them that when they returned to the plant, the statements would be ready for them to sign. He asked to speak with Ken again. Upon Ken's return to the phone, Mr. Gilbert instructed him to come back to the plant for signing papers in the legal department. After hanging up, Mr. Gilbert suggested to Marge that she take me out for lunch and return in a couple of hours once the legal team had finished their work. We enjoyed a fantastic lunch, and although I wanted to express my gratitude, I refrained from doing so. Eventually, Marge convinced me not to discuss the matter or what was done ever again. She also made me promise not to mention anything to Cindy, which was a positive sign. I informed Marge about my new job offer, and she was happy for me and the boys. After lunch, we went back to the plant, where I obtained notarized copies of Ken and Janice's statements. Both confirmed they had engaged in consensual closeness outside their marriage. The legal team assured me this would be sufficient for my lawyer to proceed with the divorce. Ken and Janice were terminated from their positions. Their belongings were packed before their arrival, and they were escorted out of the building. Unfortunately, neither of them had a car. Marge provided me with her car to use temporarily, and I promised to return it the following day. I dropped off the documents at the lawyer's office. She made multiple copies of each, which I intended to send to Ken's wife. I closed our bank accounts, paid off and canceled all credit cards, and arranged for the utilities to be disconnected. On Friday afternoon, I visited John Fritz and assured him I had behaved. He chuckled and mentioned that he informed the landlord about not renewing the lease next month. Additionally, he had given notice at work, noting that they were supportive but disappointed about his departure. Freddie accompanied me to the Gilbert Ranch with my truck so I could return Marge's car. It was time to pick up the boys and head home. I dreaded walking through the door. Janice's car wasn't in the driveway. When we entered, she was sitting on the couch crying. This was the first time she had shown any emotion at all. 2 file boxes containing her personal belongings from work were nearby. I fed the boys and put on the TV for them. I stood by her, giving her an opportunity to speak if she wanted. She expressed her frustration, stating that I had to interfere and ruin everything in her life. She questioned why I couldn't mind my own business and accused me of not having the right to interfere with hers. I was astonished that she still viewed the situation as solely concerning her, showing no concern for the children or me, nor considering Ken's wife, Amy. Our family, our life, and our plans meant nothing to her. Her only focus was her own actions. At that moment, I felt relieved that I wouldn't spend the rest of my life with her. Without a word, I went upstairs and took a shower. Later, while getting the boys ready for bed, she retreated to the bedroom and shut the door. The next day, I took the boys with me to work, ensuring there were no loose ends and that Roy and Freddie could manage the system I'd established. We gathered boxes from stores for the move. Passing by the Holiday Inn, I noticed Janice's car was gone, presumably repaired by now. Fixing the flat tires likely took a toll on her shopping budget for the past month. Janice wasn't home when we returned. We only took clothes and toys, leaving everything else for her to dispose of. She didn't know that by the next day, all the utilities would be shut off. Damn, I was ruthless. As we backed out of the driveway, Janice pulled in. She stood by her car, watching us drive away. I took the boys to Chuck E. Cheese and stayed at a motel overnight. The next morning, I dropped them off at daycare. I gave Carol cookies and party favors, explaining it was their last day, and I wanted them to enjoy it with their friends before leaving. She pulled me aside and asked about my wife's behavior the previous week. She explained that she didn't want to pry, but since I was leaving, she was curious. She mentioned that my wife seemed furious when she called, demanding to know where she got the number. When she mentioned that I gave it to her, my wife started cursing. Although my wife didn't say anything when she picked up the children, she could tell she was really angry. She apologized for involving Carol, admitting she set her up. She revealed that Janice was having an affair and was at the Holiday Inn with her boyfriend. She hoped that by Carol calling and interrupting their party, Janice would reconsider, but it didn't work, and Janice got mad at both of them. She mentioned that she would be serving Janice with divorce papers that afternoon and would be leaving with the boys for a new job right after picking them up. She acknowledged it was a low blow on her part and apologized for involving Carol. Later, I went to see my divorce lawyer, who had everything ready. I would have custody of the kids, and Janice could have visitation rights whenever she wanted. This arrangement was fine with me, as I didn't think she would be interested in them anyhow. Everything else was split 50-50ths, but there wasn't much to divide. There was no alimony, child support, or cash settlements. I left her all the furniture, appliances, and household items. I really didn't want them. She kept her car, which I didn't want because it kept getting flat tires. All I had to do was give the papers to Janice. Unless she contested it, everything would be final in 3 months. A copy of Ken and Janice's notarized statement was attached to the divorce paperwork. The lawyer's note indicated that the statements would remain private if all terms were agreed upon. There were no questions. Her car was in the driveway, so I knew she was home. I sat there for a while. I had loved Janice. She was the only girl I was ever close to. I assumed our relationship was normal and didn't realize I wasn't meeting her needs. She never directly communicated, and I was too oblivious to pick up the clues. I had failed her in many ways. While her actions were deceitful, I felt some of it was due to my inattention. It felt strange knocking on my own door. She opened it, looking tired. She asked if I wanted a drink. I handed her the papers. Without opening them, she looked at them and then back at me. I asked why. I couldn't tell if she was angry or sad. After a pause, she expressed her thoughts, highlighting the disparities between them. She pointed out the contrast in scents, noting his aftershave compared to my fertilizer-like odor. The distinction extended to their clothing choices, with him favoring Armani suits while I preferred jeans. Their dining preferences also diverged, as he indulged in lobster while I savored ribs. The dissimilarities continued with his London fog coat juxtaposed against my Carhartt attire, and his fancy car opposed to my truck. She remarked on the state of our nails, with his being manicured and mine consistently dirty. Additionally, she emphasized the difference in their professional status, with him having a real job while I was perceived as just a farm boy. She conveyed regret for our marriage, confessing that her initial reasons were misguided, seeking an escape from her parents through the relationship with me, without considering the long-term consequences. Despite this apology, her sentiments remained unaltered. She professed love for her children, but simultaneously expressed regret for having them, admitting a lack of maternal instinct. The pursuit of someone to fulfill her dreams, she realized, did not bring the satisfaction she anticipated, but left her feeling more dissatisfied with her current circumstances. She acknowledged misleading me and being an inadequate mother to our children. However, she did not regret the pursuit of her dreams and the quest for something better. In response to my inquiries about his wife, her demeanor swiftly changed. Instead of remorse, she exhibited anger and a refusal to feel sorry for her actions. She communicated a strong desire to follow the life she had always imagined: a husband with a farm boy background and 2 children with unkempt appearances. She asserted her independence, stating that she didn't need assistance and already had the necessary documents. She concluded by urging me to leave so she could proceed with her chosen path in life. Well, that simplified things. I turned and walked out. When I picked up the boys, Carol said to let her know if I needed more phone calls. I called the utility companies and told them not to disconnect until the end of the month. I felt a little sorry for her. The divorce was final in 3 months. I never heard from Janice. The lawyer said everything went smoothly. My new job was great. However, I missed out on the opportunity to buy the business. Someone else got it, along with prime land. They planned to turn it into a horse breeding farm. My job was secure, but my chance at owning my own place took a setback. 2 weeks later, construction started next to the feed store. We speculated about what was being built until one of the guys asked the site engineer. It was a vet clinic for large animals. They completed the building in less than 60 days. The new owner was due to show up Saturday. On the way to lunch, the boys suddenly yelled, "Cindy! Cindy!" There she was, looking better than ever with Marge. Cindy had become a veterinarian and wanted to raise show horses while running a large animal clinic. She was building a house nearby. We all went to lunch together, and Cindy shared her plans. The boys and I were beaming all the way home that night. 5 years later, Cindy had a successful clinic and horse breeding venture. I owned 6 feed stores. The boys had 2 baby sisters they adored. My mother-in-law, Marge, and Mr. Gilbert visited every weekend. I never learned his first name, and Janice never visited the boys. Second story, I'm at a loss for where to begin. It's devastating to realize my wife no longer wants to live with me. What's worse is her refusal to provide a reason. She's resistant to moving in with me, and my mother supports her in this decision. Allow me to provide some context. I'm a 51-year-old man who had to leave my hometown 13 years ago for work, leaving my wife Mona, who is 48, and our 2 children in Texas. They are now 23 and 21, residing independently in Houston. Around 13-14 years ago, during the U.S. recession caused by the housing bubble, our business collapsed overnight. With my father's passing and me running his construction business, everything fell apart. Balancing the care of my mother, 2 school-age kids, and my wife became overwhelming in such an unstable economy. After depleting all our savings, I had no choice but to make the tough decision to move out. After exploring opportunities in various Asian countries, I eventually established my business in Dubai. Though challenging, the drive to provide for my family kept me going. After leaving Texas, it took me over a year before I could return home to establish my new venture. Since then, I visited home every 5 to 6 months. I desired to bring my family with me, but Mona and the kids were reluctant due to concerns about disrupting their schooling. Last year, when my youngest daughter finished college and secured a job, I planned to visit home to spend time with her. During that visit, I suggested to Mona that we relocate here now that the children have moved out, but she declined. Fearing leaving my mother alone, I proposed bringing my mother along, but they both opposed the idea of leaving their hometown, citing the vast cultural differences in the Middle East. They had valid concerns, so I didn't press further. During my last visit home, I shared with Mona my intention to wrap up things in Dubai and return to Texas. I anticipated her excitement, but instead, she reacted unhappily. I inquired why she didn't want us to live together, and she explained she was content but puzzled why I'd leave everything behind. While she had a point about the sacrifices made to establish myself in Dubai, after 13 years away and with our children grown, I longed to return to my comfort zone. I reassured her about our finances and plans to establish something in Texas, given the improved economy. However, she remained unconvinced, which raised concerns for me. Though I gave her the benefit of the doubt, the next morning, my mother dropped by unexpectedly and advised against my quick decision to return. Since I hadn't shared my plans with her or anyone else, it must have been Mona who informed her. I was taken aback. Similar to Mona, my mom's concern made me doubt myself. I began to wonder if I was making a mistake and ultimately abandoned the idea. However, I couldn't shake off the distress caused by my wife's reluctance to live with me. While her reasoning might make sense, I felt devastated by Mona's emotional distance. This feeling consumed me so much that upon returning home, I reduced my calls and texts with her. I hoped she would notice and inquire, but she seemed indifferent to whether everything was okay. There were days when I didn't reach out, and she didn't either. Over time, her communication became purely transactional, indicating that she no longer relied on me. So, last month I confronted her, questioning if she still loved me. She dismissed it as overthinking, explaining that she was busy caring for the household and my aging mother. I was at a loss for words. It's uncommon for a wife to bond so well with her mother-in-law and care for them. While I appreciated Mona's kindness to my mom, my unease grew daily. I couldn't comprehend why she didn't want me home when we already had our own house, our major responsibilities were fulfilled, and I reassured her that our lifestyle wouldn't suffer. It just didn't make sense. Yes, I considered the same possibility as you all might be thinking. Perhaps she found someone else. But how could I uncover the truth? She hadn't shown any other signs until now. She had been a fantastic mother, bravely raising our children during my absence. It wasn't easy. She fulfilled all her roles gracefully. Sometimes I feel guilty for suspecting her, but you know how challenging long-distance relationships can be. Update: Mona had been having an affair, and my mother had known all along but never told me. I can't understand why I deserved this fate. I arranged a surprise trip home without informing anyone, not even my mom. As I entered my house, I dreaded encountering Mona with her lover. It's somewhat ironic, given the stories I've heard about cheating spouses of deployed spouses. Thankfully, that scenario didn't unfold. Mona was in the kitchen when I used the spare key to enter the house. She was visibly shocked to see me. To conceal my surprise visit, I brought a bouquet. Although Mona seemed surprised, she also appeared suspicious of my unexpected arrival and bombarded me with questions. I explained that I had light work that month, prompting me to come home. Mona managed a forced smile, pretending to be pleased, but it was clearly insincere. Over the next few weeks, I painstakingly uncovered the truth. I resorted to tactics I'm not proud of, but I felt I had no choice. I snooped through her phone, listened in on her conversation, planted a GPS tracker in her car, and trailed her around town. This investigation yielded information bit by bit, painting a clear picture of what was happening in my absence. It transpired that she had been seeing someone for the past 8 years. Upon my return home, Mona was unusually guarded about her phone, unlike before, when she would clean up all evidence. This time, she didn't have the chance. Although I attempted to snoop through her phone on the first day, I was unsuccessful. When I eventually gained access, I found nothing incriminating. She likely wiped it clean at the first opportunity. The affair came to light when I tracked her movements using a GPS device in her car. Initially, I didn't suspect anything when I observed her entering a hardware store. However, upon waiting for her return, I noticed the owner closing the shop. It left me feeling dizzy. Hours later, I saw Mona leaving the shop, and the owner reopened it once her car had departed. I considered entering the shop to confront her lover, but I hesitated, fearing he might recognize me and ruin my plan. I patiently waited for her next visit, hoping to catch them in the act. She typically ventured out in the afternoon, sometimes visiting my mom with friends or relatives. I followed her everywhere, hoping to catch her with her paramour. Finally, yesterday she went to visit my mom. Ordinarily, I refrained from following her further on such occasions, which is why it took me so long to catch them. But yesterday, I remained vigilant and witnessed them leaving the house together. It didn't strike me as suspicious at the time. I assumed they were heading for shopping or some other errand. Though I initially resisted the urge to follow them, something compelled me to do so. They stopped at the hardware store, and my heart sank when I saw her lover greet them both. Mona and my mom exited the car. Her lover kissed Mona in front of my mom, and they conversed briefly. Then, he hugged my mom before she got back in the car and drove off. Mona and her lover entered his shop and he closed the shutter behind them. I couldn't believe what I was witnessing. Betrayal from one's spouse is one thing, but betrayal from one's own mother is unimaginable. The truth overwhelmed me to the point where I had to take a few moments to catch my breath before proceeding to the shop. My knocks went unanswered, so I persisted until her lover finally opened the door. I demanded to know where Mona was, and he froze. I pushed past him and stormed into the shop before he had a chance to respond. The lights went out and I heard a faint voice from the storeroom. Hastily, I rushed in to find my wife lying exposed, pleasuring herself and calling out for someone else. It lasted only a moment before someone else leaped at me and dragged me out as Mona screamed loudly. The scene was so chaotic that it took me a while to grasp what was happening. I struck the intruder and broke free. By then, Mona had emerged, hastily covering herself. I seized her by the arm and demanded to know how long this had been going on. But Mona intervened, pleading for us to discuss it at home. Aware I could face consequences for the altercation, I backed off, exited, and drove away. I headed to my mom's place. Bursting inside, I shouted accusations, convinced she was aware. Mona had already informed her, as my mom's lack of surprise indicated. She simply cried and held my hand, urging me to calm down. I collapsed emotionally. Soon Mona joined us. Seeing her face only fueled my anger. I implored them both to tell me the truth. After much prodding, Mona confessed to feeling deeply lonely during my absence. For 13 years, I had been so consumed with work that I had little time for her. My calls were brief check-ins about the kids and mom. But what about me? I demanded to know how long this had been going on. She admitted perhaps 7 or 8 years. Shocked, I felt like a fool. I had toiled abroad for years to provide for my family, only to find this betrayal waiting for me at home. I questioned why she hadn't sought a divorce if our connection had deteriorated so much. She broke down again, insisting she loved me and the affair was solely to alleviate her loneliness. He meant nothing to her, she claimed. I couldn't believe it. I turned to my mom, asking how I deserved such betrayal from her. She wept, pleading for understanding, explaining Mona had been caring for her. Once I had all the answers, I rose to leave. They tried to stop me, but I warned them not to. I instructed Mona not to return home, needing time alone. Driving back, I felt nauseous, unsure how to process it all. Was this affair truly my fault for sacrificing so much for my family? Update. I spent the following days deeply immersed in sorrow. Afterwards, I drove to Houston to see my grown daughters. They weren't children anymore. They deserved to know what their mother had been doing while I provided for them. I also did it to protect myself. My intention was to leave the country, fearing Mona might manipulate my daughters against me. They were devastated by the truth. The older one even suspected Mona and my mom were up to something. She also mentioned suspecting my mom of seeing a widower nearby. However, that was not my concern. My dad had passed away years ago, so my mom could do as she pleased. Yet she supported Mona, causing problems for me. The following day, I packed up and returned home. Mona and Mom had been calling incessantly since then. I think they came home to find an empty house, facing reality. Initially, I left them for a month. The calls and texts were filled with apologies, pleading for my return. But eventually, they became concerned about money. I intentionally didn't block them, wanting to see their anxiety without funds. I froze my bank accounts and credit cards. They panicked, realizing they had no income. Mom's state pension wasn't enough to sustain their lifestyle. They tried everything to reach me, but I ignored them. Mom resorted to emotional manipulation, claiming my late father would be heartbroken. Their pleas fell on deaf ears. I never suspected Mona. I never checked her phone like people in long-distance relationships do, but I always respected her privacy. More than Mona, I felt betrayed by my mom sometimes, especially when I sensed something was off with Mona. Witnessing their strong bond made me feel betrayed again. In return, their excuse for covering up Mona's affair was weak. Feeling lonely, she chose to cheat. She felt alone despite having family and friends around. Compared to her, I was lonelier, literally alone in a foreign land. I could have done the same, but I didn't. I was focused on my family's well-being, working hard to save and return home. When their attempts to contact me failed, they reached out to my daughter for help. Mona didn't know I had told the truth to the girls, and she did exactly what I expected. She spoke ill of me in front of them, alleging I had cut them off financially or was having an affair. However, my daughter saw through her lies and confronted her, driving her away that day. But Mona continued to reach out to my younger daughter, exploiting her innocence for money. However, I won't intervene. She's an adult who knows what to do. Mom has also reached out to my daughter for financial help. As for me, I'm still unable to move on from the feeling of betrayal. I haven't considered divorce yet. Divorce would be financially and personally beneficial for Mona if she wants to marry someone else. However, I won't pursue it. She's already living in my house, and that's the most she can get from me. Being out of the country with no accountability, whether divorced or not, doesn't matter to me. I'm focused on moving on with my life. Update: after cutting off their financial support, they exhausted all possible resources. While my older daughter refused to assist, the younger one was manipulated into helping. However, her earnings from her low-paying first job barely covered her essentials. Despite this, she's saving some to assist her mother, which made me proud. Eventually, she became overwhelmed and suggested Mona find employment to support herself, but Mona took her assistance for granted, insisting it was her daughter's duty to care for her. Despite doing her best with her limited income, my younger daughter reached her breaking point and ceased providing support. Unable to marry someone new while still married to me, Mona has been pressuring me for a divorce. She's threatened legal action, but I'm unfazed. Being abroad, I doubt she has the resources or knowledge to pursue legal action across borders. Plus, in this country, there are no legal consequences for abandoning a cheating spouse, so good luck to her with that. Currently, Mona works at her partner's shop, though I'm unsure of her compensation, whether it's money or something else. Her partner doesn't even have a proper home, residing in a camper, and his financial situation seems inadequate to support Mona. As far as my mom is concerned, sometimes I feel guilty for cutting her off and consider helping her out. However, she receives a pension that should suffice for her needs. She brought this situation upon herself. Perhaps I'll reconcile with her in the future, but not now. Although she's apologized, it didn't feel sincere. I'll wait until she truly regrets her actions and my anger subsides, allowing love to prevail. Some advise me to move on and enjoy the vibrant lifestyle of Dubai, but it's not all as glamorous as portrayed on social media. It requires a substantial amount of money. Moreover, the legal landscape regarding women is stringent here, and I'm not interested in using women to cope with my grief. However, I've been traveling extensively since then, exploring places like China and Bali, with plans to visit more Asian countries and experience their cultures.
Story 2.
My wife cheated with my college friend, so I ensured their reputations were destroyed. I think the best way for me to explain the situation is to start from the beginning, which takes us back to when I was in college. My roommate was a guy called Brian, and he ended up being a super cool guy. In fact, we hit it off almost immediately, and he's still a fantastic friend of mine to this day. I wouldn't say he's my best friend, but he's certainly in the top 3. We used to do everything college boys did: go to parties, drink, smoke weed, and pick up girls. We were both rather good with women, if I do say so myself. By the time we were in our junior year, I met a senior girl that we'll just call Andrea for the sake of this story. I mean, I had my way with women, and I know this will sound corny to a lot of you, but it didn't take long for me to start wondering whether I was in love with Andrea. We hung out a lot. She was pretty, she was interesting to talk to, and she gave me a person to talk to about non-frat-like things. Andrea and I started dating, and that basically took me out of the womanizing scene that I was in with Brian. He was a bit bummed, but I still played wingman when we went out. When he met Andrea, he understood. After that, he stopped trying to push me to pick up girls and respected our relationship, which made me respect him more. Remember, we were young and stupid, so it would have been so easy for him to egg me on with, "She'll never know," and the like. Anyway, Andrea graduated first, then me, and we dated for years. We finally got married when it felt like the time was right. Honestly, the happiest day of my life. I guess it is for a lot of people, at least until you have your first kid. Our marriage has been relatively smooth and clean. We're not ready for children yet, as we're still trying to get our lives in perfect order before then, and things are going great in that regard. Andrea has an online business that sells all sorts of wholesome and inspirational merch for women, and it does pretty well. I work as an auto mechanic, though I'm aiming to get my own shop soon and am close to having what I need. I think that's the necessary background to understand why I'm writing this in the first place. Brian comes around to visit me now and again. I mean, he's one of my best friends, and only one of the 2 who lives really close by. He told me that he'd be coming to visit me that evening, and I gave him a time when I'd be back. Unfortunately for me, on the way back home, I had a flat tire and had to replace it on the side of the road. I was tired after the day I had, but I managed to put the spare on as fast as I could. I did get caught in after work traffic though, but thankfully not for too long. I think the whole thing must have cost me like 30 to 40 minutes. It was while I was changing the tire that Brian had called me to tell me he had gotten to my place. He messaged again right as I hit the traffic. I let him know the situation and headed home. Now here's where the problem comes in, and it's where I need to know all of your thoughts. I pulled into our parking spot, and since I drive an M2 that I've done quite a bit of work on, it's easy to hear when I've gotten back home. Now, I've been replaying this over and over in my head. I think it must have taken me about 90 seconds from parking to getting back into the apartment. When I opened the door, I saw Brian and my wife in the living room, but things seemed odd. This wasn't the first time that the two of them had been left at home alone. But it was probably the first time they had been alone for so long without me. Usually, it would be like 10 minutes tops. Here's the thing. Andrea welcomed me like she always does, and Brian seemed cool, but there was just something off. Andrea seemed a lot more disheveled than Brian. Her hair was slightly messed up, just slightly, but enough that I could notice it. I mean, that alone isn't what's making me suspicious, but honestly, I just have a gut feeling. I don't know. I feel like something might have happened, but there's really no precedent for me to believe that. Well, to be fair, Brian is a cheater. The guy is married and has been cheating on his wife for a long time. I don't tolerate it, and I've tried to return the favor he did for me back in college by trying my best to keep him faithful. But at the end of the day, he does what he wants. The first few times he was remorseful, but now he seems to just enjoy it without any regrets. Before you all judge me, I'm not a fan of being friends with this version of Brian. Anytime we go out and he starts talking about women that he sees around, I get pissed off. But otherwise, he's still the same great guy I've known since college, so I can't just cut him off as a friend. Honestly, it's a lot harder to do than you'd think. But with Brian, as much as he is a cheater, I imagine I know at least 10 cases where he's cheated on his wife over the last 4 years. Some people have always seemed off limits. He's talked nasty about his sister-in-law, but he always gives a disclaimer that he'd never do anything with her. I mean, he's never talked that way about Andrea, but I'd make the very obvious assumption that she's off limits too. Again, he's known her since our college days, and this is one of my closest friends. I keep doing all sorts of mental gymnastics, wondering whether something happened between them or not, and I really can't tell. I don't think Andrea would allow it. I don't think Brian would either, even if the other was interested. But for both of these people, who I imagine to be loyal, giving in to temptation seems improbable. Anyway, I really want to hear other people's thoughts on this because I've been unable to talk to anyone I know about it. It just seems so embarrassing. Again, I walked in, they seemed to be acting odd, and my wife's hair seemed a little messier than usual. I've known her for a long time, so I could tell that something was off, but I don't know what. I've never seen both of them like that. Saying it back now, it could be a million things that aren't them getting intimate, but again, I really need a second opinion. Thanks, everyone. Edit. I saw a lot of comments saying that there's nothing substantial to go on, and I agree, though there is a gut feeling, and I've learned to trust those over the years. Reading all the stories here can make it seem like everyone is always cheating, which is fair, but there was a good point made that it's better for me to be safe than sorry. And nothing should stop me from trying to get to the bottom of things, even if it means going through her phone. So, I think that's what I'm going to try to do. I really hope I find nothing, though. That won't confirm that nothing happened. Honestly, if it bothers me way too much, I'll just ask her straight up. She's always been honest with me, as far as I know. Let's break it down. You've got Brian, the not-so-great role model for marital fidelity, and Andrea, your wife, who's apparently into selling wholesome merchandise but maybe not practicing wholesomeness herself. Now, I'm no detective, but if this were a movie, it would be titled The Suspicious Hairdo. You walk in, your wife's hair looks like it just had a WrestleMania match with a tornado. And Brian's there like he's auditioning for the role of innocent bystander number 1. I feel like Brian had her in more than just a half Nelson. Update 2. So here's a link to the initial part of my story, and now I'm back with an update. It's really not the type of update I wanted to be writing, but now I'm really split on what to do. I really can't think straight. I didn't get a chance to go through my wife's phone. Yes, I had a hard time getting the courage to do it because it felt like an invasion of privacy, but I was going to do it anyway. I just didn't get the chance before she came to confess. Yeah, that's something that typically doesn't happen in people's experiences here, so I had no idea how to react. She told me that while they were waiting for me in the living room, Brian asked her for a beer, and he went to the fridge to get it for himself. When he came back to sit down, he sat beside her and started talking about the college days. She says he put his arm around her while talking about this and started saying how he'd always thought she was pretty and hated that. He never got a chance to show her that. According to her, he started getting really touchy with her at that point, saying all the things he'd like to do to her if she gave him the chance. She said she was quiet for the most part, and he went in for a kiss, and she returned it. They basically full-on made out. His hand went under the t-shirt she was wearing, but she claims that was the extent of it. Considering she was confessing, I couldn't help but feel like she might have left out details that made her more culpable. I had no clue how to react after hearing that. Like, how do you actually react after a confession like that? What do you do? She obviously felt crappy enough about it, and she didn't take long to come out with it. But that certainly doesn't do anything to make her less of a cheater, does it? There was a sense of relief to have that confirmation because I felt like I was going crazy with overthinking before, but I really had no clue what to do. What do people do when a cheating partner confesses instead of being found out? Are you meant to be more merciful? I had to leave the house and go sleep somewhere else because I really couldn't put my thoughts together, and it was unhealthy for us to be in the same place at that point. The next day, I considered going back home to talk, but I decided to confront Brian. Maybe she had already told him that she had come clean, but I needed to talk to him and find out what was true and what wasn't. I've known him longer than her, but I also knew enough about him to know that he was a chronic cheater, and that just made me not want to give him the benefit of the doubt. I called him up to meet at the bar we liked, and he didn't seem off when I told him. We got there, ordered drinks, and when they arrived, I sprung the question on him. I asked him straight up what happened between him and my wife that day. I actually saw him freeze when I asked that. The first thing he did was apologize for betraying me, and then he went into the whole story, but it was a little different from what Andrea told me. According to Brian, he got there, and they spoke a little bit. He said it was the usual small talk, but then she came to sit beside him and started touching him up. Slightly at first, then a lot more deliberately soon after they confirmed I was still stuck in traffic. According to him, he asked where I was the second time that night because he was trying to avoid anything happening between them. But, you know how I am, man, was his justification for eventually giving in to my wife's seduction. I mean, at least he confirmed that it was just making out and feeling up and nothing more. Honestly, though, I couldn't stand to be around him at that point. And I really didn't care whose story was true and whose was false because it just seemed like two people each trying to cover their butts. At the end of the day, the only thing I knew for sure was that they made out. One of my good friends betrayed me, and my wife cheated on me, and no matter how much their stories tried to confuse me, that was the bottom line. All I did was express how disappointed I was in him, especially considering how long we had known each other. Then I left and went back to the place I was staying. This happened yesterday, so I now know that two of the closest people to me have screwed me over, and I don't know how to feel. My wife confessed, but I don't think that means anything. It doesn't change the fact that she cheated on me with one of my best friends. The only silver lining to this whole thing is that I'm finding out I can't trust this woman only about 2 years into our marriage. Some people go decades before this kind of moment. In the morning, I'm going to call a divorce lawyer to set things up because I honestly don't think there's any other outcome for this. Forgiveness has crossed my mind, but it's the love I have for Andrea that's pushing me to find some way to make things work. But I can't. Can I? I just know I'm going to resent her. I already do. I'll give you all an update when something changes, but for now, I'll just fall asleep with the help of some cheap booze. See y'all later. Ah, yes, there it is. So your wife decides to spill the beans on her little makeout session with Brian, huh? And Brian, oh good old Brian, tries to spin it like your wife was the seductive siren luring him into the rocky shores of infidelity. At least they're both on the same page about one thing. They're both expert-level backstabbers. And what's your next move? Divorce? Yep, that seems like a pretty reasonable response. Update 3. Hey everyone, let me just say that as I'm writing this update for you, I'm a much happier man. I think it's been, 3 months and a few weeks since my last update to you all? Hopefully, you don't need to read the entire thing over for a refresher. I'm the guy whose wife cheated on him with his good friend, but here's a link to the previous story if you want to go over the whole thing. The last thing I told all of you was about how I was already getting ready to find a divorce lawyer. And just like I said, the next day one of my other friends who I was sure I could actually trust a lot more, gave me the number of a good friend of his who was a divorce lawyer. I called her up and arranged an appointment to meet her at her firm. She sounded like she knew her stuff, to be honest. And I'm rather clueless when it comes to the intricacies of divorces, because very few people close to me have divorced. She explained everything well, and I made sure to pay her retainer within the week. Considering I was going to have a lot of legal expenses to deal with, I went back home. It's not like I had gone completely incognito on Andrea, but I hadn't been very talkative with her over the phone. She was happy to see me back at home, probably thinking this was the first sign of things getting back to normal. I didn't make intentional efforts to make her feel that way, but neither did I dissuade her. She kept trying to act normal and make jokes, but I was pretty stone-faced through the whole thing. She came to the living room one night when I was sleeping on the couch and apologized for the whole thing all over again, and I just nodded. When she was done, she sat there for a while before going back to the bedroom. Once the papers had been prepared by the lawyer, I served them to Andrea right away. She looked so surprised, which was stupid to me because I didn't think divorce was too irrational a conclusion for someone who cheated on their spouse with a best friend. She kept asking over and over whether I was serious or joking, but honestly, each time she asked, I just got more pissed looking at her. I said nothing in response beyond, "I want a divorce." What really set me off was when she said, "I confessed." I said I was sorry. Doesn't that mean anything to you? I was so close to losing my temper at that point. I had to remind her that she and my friend from college had both betrayed me, and as much as she felt like her confession had changed anything, it hadn't. As much as they hadn't gone all the way, that didn't change anything either. Honestly, I was so pissed off at the silly excuses she was making, and what sent me for the door was when she said, "I wish I hadn't said anything," with tears pouring down her cheeks. Basically, she would have preferred for me to be an ignorant fool who would still hang out with his sleazeball best friend and still sleep beside his cheating wife. No thanks. I left the house again because I was scared I'd do something to her if she said the wrong thing again. The whole divorce process started sometime later, and to be honest, things looked pretty well stacked in my favor. I mean, I've been trying to get my own shop started up, and while I was a bit sad that things weren't going as fast as I wanted, it was probably for the best. My wife was still the breadwinner with her business, and it seemed like I was going to end up with some degree of alimony if my lawyer could pull it off, especially because my wife was a cheating witch. And I had chat records from immediately after she confessed, full of her apologizing for what she had done. I was going to let the law do its thing, but was I also going to let Brian get away with his part in the whole thing? It didn't really matter who seduced whom because, at the end of the day, they were both into it. Nobody forced anyone else, and to me, cheating isn't a mistake. It's not like accidentally putting salami in your sandwich instead of pastrami or something. Both of them knew what they were doing was wrong. But they had the self-control of animals and couldn't keep their hands to themselves. I will confess that I felt like a horrible guy doing this, but I called up Brian's wife and told her everything about her husband and his cheating, including with Andrea. Honestly, I don't know whether she had no idea or just didn't know the full extent of it, but she actually started crying over the phone. She asked why I didn't tell her sooner, but the only thing I could say was that I didn't know how it felt until now. She eventually thanked me, and I spent the rest of the day wondering if that was the right thing to do. It made me wonder if I'd have wanted to stay ignorant, but I realized the answer to that was no, and I hope it was the same for her. Anyway, it was only about 3 hours later that I got an extremely long text message from Brian, full of expletives, and honestly, I just laughed at it because it wasn't a problem when he made out with Andrea, and it wasn't a problem when he slept with countless other women. But the consequences of his actions, that's what he couldn't handle. I really don't think being faithful is super tough. I didn't reply to his message because there was nothing to say to it, and the only things I could think of would have just riled him up more. I was getting the last laugh, clearly. Spoiler alert, a few weeks ago, his wife moved out. As for Andrea, the divorce proceedings were relatively tame. I think it was because she actually knew she messed up and there was a lot against her. The fact that there was evidence pointing to her cheating put her at a disadvantage. Her lawyer seemed disappointed that she owned up to it. I guess she had advised her to deny it entirely. There was a pretty sizable gap in our income, so I ended up being entitled to alimony. Honestly, I didn't need it because I could get by on my own. But I still took it anyway because I really didn't want to lose out on any opportunities to hit back at her. The apartment was probably the messiest part of the whole thing because neither of us was willing to move out. I mean, it was rented and rent was going to be due in a few months, so it wouldn't hurt too much if I didn't get it. But again, I wasn't trying to make things easy for her. I did eventually let the house go because we live in a community property state, and her snake of a lawyer tried to bring my car to the splitting table, which I certainly wasn't about to entertain. Unfortunately for her, losing the apartment didn't exactly make me feel more hospitable toward her. The divorce was finalized, and I had to do the only thing I had left to do. I called her parents, I called her siblings, and I called a few other relatives to let them all know that Andrea and I were parting ways because she was a cheater who almost slept with my best friend. I preferred putting it that way since they likely would have, had I not come sooner. Naturally, they were shocked, and a lot of them tried to get me to rethink things, but I let them know that it was final. And that was that. I also wrote a post on Facebook, tagging her and letting everyone know that we were no longer together. I didn't lay out all the details, honestly. I don't know why I held back, but I did make it clear that she had cheated on me. She runs an online business and makes clothes with all sorts of inspirational jargon for young women, and I hope that my post will naturally reach the right people and get amplified. The 5 people who potentially see her as a role model might need a reality check to know she's not the wholesome woman they think she is. At this point, my post got a little traction, but as far as I know, it hasn't blown up beyond at least 2 TikTok videos I saw. Maybe it will blow up some more, maybe it won't, but I've done what I can, and I'm fine with it. Look, fellas, whether she confesses or not means nothing. Cheating isn't a mistake, and it's something that deserves to be punished because emotional pain might be the only way a cheater can learn. That's what I think. Maybe the next person she ends up with will be luckier. Edit, I'm smiling right now because just a few days after this, my ex-wife called me, crying and begging me to take down my Facebook post. Supposedly, she had gotten a few DMs on her business Instagram account, asking whether what I said was true. Apparently, her TikTok comment section had one person break the news, asking whether it was true or not, and that's how the whole thing spiraled out of control. I don't think her business will die because of this, but it's hurt her reputation, at least in front of a few hundred people at the very least, and that's fine by me. Maybe I'll make my own TikTok account and have some fun with the whole thing. I'm glad that I was able to get my satisfaction out of such an unfortunate situation. First, you hit her with those divorce papers like a legal wrecking ball. Then you spill the beans to her family and friends faster than a gossiping grandma at bingo night. And let's not forget the Facebook post outing her as the cheating scoundrel she is, bravo. But the real icing on the cake? Her business takes a hit thanks to your little social media bombshell. Ah, sweet, sweet revenge. Served cold and with a side of internet infamy. And the fact that you're considering joining TikTok just to keep the drama train rolling? Priceless. Who needs therapy when you've got a divorce, a vendetta, and a knack for social media warfare? You, OP, are the hero we never knew we needed in the world of relationship drama. What do you make of all this? Thank you for joining us today.
Story 3.
My girlfriend Hannah and I both grew up in a big town with around 20,000 people. Although we attended the same high school, we didn't meet until a few years ago. After college, I got a job that required a lot of travel in the state. I asked to work at my hometown's branch to do business there and in my hometown. They agreed because there was no business representative there. After a few months, I settled into a routine, 1 to 2 weeks at the city office, 1 week in my hometown, and 1 to 2 weeks traveling around the country. After a year, I decided to buy a house in my hometown. I met Hannah at a Friday night party. I had just returned from a trip and was checking paperwork at my office when Craig, the managing director and colleague, walked in. Craig and I grew up together, but we attended different high schools. Still, we became close friends. He asked about things and invited me to a house party with his buddies that evening. It was short notice, but I said yes for some drinks with friends. At the party, Craig introduced me to Hannah, a new hire at the branch where my hometown's office was. We hit it off immediately. Everything went well. Hannah got along with my parents, and her parents were happy she found someone who made her happy after dealing with relationship issues and depression. After 2 years of dating, she moved into my house in my hometown. Everything was good for nearly a year, then things changed. FaceTime sessions were cut short, or she was too busy to answer the phone. Neighbors told me about a car similar to Craig's, a black Chevy Camaro, seen near my house when I was away. Clothes that weren't mine were found in my wardrobe. Signs pointed to her cheating, but she denied it, saying I was overthinking. She claimed Craig occasionally came over for business discussions, but never stayed the night. I brushed it aside, thinking I was paranoid, and carried on as if nothing was wrong, but there was a nagging feeling that something wasn't right. I discovered she had been lying to me. Nearly 6 months later, I completed a large contract early, decided to book an earlier flight home and surprise everyone. Driving into my hometown, I noticed Craig's car blocking the back entrance gate. Confused, I approached the house and saw Hannah and Craig having bed life in the kitchen. Shocked and dejected, I left without them noticing. I drove in my car for what felt like a really long time. I was crying a lot, but soon the sadness turned into anger. I really wanted to hurt them badly, but I'm not a person who believes in violence. That's when I decided I was going to make them suffer and ruin their lives. And what better time to start than now? I drove back up the alley, keeping a distance from my driveway to see Craig's car. Then I walked back to the gate, where I could see into the house, and called her phone. When it rang, both of them looked shocked as my name showed up on the caller ID. I saw that she was thinking about answering, but they let it ring for a bit before going back to what they were doing. It rang again. This time she picked up the phone. As she was answering, I hung up and went back to my car. As soon as I did, she called me back and asked why I was calling so late. I said I was about 15 minutes from home and didn't want to scare her when I was coming in. She was surprised, but acted happy that I was coming. The call ended quickly after she said she was going to get up and get changed. I said bye and hung up. A few moments later, Craig rushed through the gate half undressed, jumped into his car, and sped off. I laughed a little, knowing they were close to getting caught. I waited a bit before turning my car into the same place Craig had been moments earlier. The night was quiet after that, and it wasn't until she fell asleep that I went to my office. I couldn't sleep. I needed a plan, and plan revenge I did. My mother always taught me to be a pacifist and let karma take its course. But this time, I decided karma needed some help. I planned to punish them separately, but ruin them both. I knew Craig had a Medicaid weakness, though not major, and kept it private. I found out accidentally when I saw some powder in his office, but pretended not to notice. I did him a favor because our office had a strict no-substance mistreat policy. Weeks later, with friends over, including Craig, for drinks, I made sure he was pretty drunk. I told him to stay the night. I took his office keys and went to our branch office. Knowing he'd be asleep until morning, I searched his desk and found a hidden compartment in a drawer. I hit the jackpot with all sorts of stuff inside. I took photos, put everything back, and installed a tiny spy camera above the door. Craig must be using medications at least twice a day, judging by what I found. I had suggested installing CCTV cameras at home for security, but Hannah was hesitant. Before leaving for a flight, I staged a break-in by smashing my back door and leaving it open. I got messages about it when I arrived. My mom was panicking, Hannah was upset, and the police asked me to call. After returning calls, I told the police I was away on business and would talk to them next week. While away, I had Hannah stay with my parents and got my dad to arrange for security cameras and an alarm system. After returning, I acted surprised about the break-in and had the security company explain everything to us. Then came the question I had been waiting for. What if we conduct some business and I don't want a record of it? When she posed this question, she acted shy, but I understood exactly why she was asking. He reassured us that this was a common question, and on the home computer, he demonstrated how to prevent certain cameras from recording if we wanted to maintain privacy, especially to protect her modesty. As I walked him out, I inquired if turning off the cameras could trigger a notification as a security precaution. He came back in, guided me through setting up email notifications, and left shortly after. Additionally, after Hannah finished grocery shopping, I strategically placed spy button cameras throughout the house. It was fantastic. All I needed to do was wait. At this juncture, I sought assistance from legal advice groups on Reddit regarding the couple's law in my country. I wanted to ensure that my upcoming plan could be legally executed, and I wouldn't be obligated to pay money or equity to Hannah. I wanted to avoid any unpleasant surprises where she might take money from me. Thanks to the Reddit community, I connected with a helpful lawyer who assured me that despite dating for almost 4.5 years, we hadn't lived together long enough to be considered a de facto couple. Also, the fact that I paid all the utilities on the property she lived in without paying rent demonstrated she had no legal standing for a financial claim against me. Just to be sure, he drafted a solid legal document, just in case anything went wrong legally. More good news followed. The next week, my boss offered me a promotion to lead the team in the city, reducing travel. Accepting the offer, I began the process of transferring, which would take about 6 weeks, ample time to gather all my evidence. Upon returning to my hometown the following week, I initiated the remaining steps of my plan. I asked Craig for a favor, requesting approval for 1 week of vacation for Hannah for 2 weeks. I aimed to send her and a friend or two on a short break. He agreed, expressing enthusiasm and congratulating me on being ready to take a significant step in my life for the second time. I hugged him back tightly, although not in the way he might have imagined. He agreed and blocked out the week for me, and I requested him to keep it a surprise, knowing it would spread like wildfire around the office. That was my plan. That evening, I informed Hannah that I had booked an all-expenses-paid trip for her and 2 friends to a tropical spa resort for a week, instructing her to pick 2 friends for the surprise of her life. I then shared that the following week, I would be in the city preparing for a crucial client, and I wouldn't be home until the Monday she was leaving. This seemed to disappoint her a bit, but I assured her it would be worth it when she returned. What I failed to disclose was my decision to take a 2-week vacation on the other side of the country, mentally preparing myself for the challenges that would arise the moment she stepped foot on the plane, all while enjoying my first taste of freedom on Sunday. 2 weeks later, I flew back and started driving home. Upon arrival, I quickly passed by my house, and sure enough, Craig's car was there. Similar to the first night I caught them, I parked a bit away and checked the CCTV cameras. They were all live, but I couldn't find them. Switching to the spy cameras and the one hidden in the bedside lamp, I discovered them in my bedroom. Since we hadn't installed any CCTV in our bedroom, she probably felt they were safe on our bed. No surprise, as I had recorded them doing this constantly over the 2 weeks I was away. I then made my first call to the police, blocking my caller ID. I informed them that I was one of my neighbors who saw someone in a car in the alley behind my house, passing things through the windows to passing cars and looking into my yard. I expressed concern about possible medication dealing, providing Craig's car details and description and stating I suspected him to be the medication dealer. They said they'd have someone there in a few minutes, so I thanked them and hung up. After that, using a new email I had just set up, I sent all the videos from the spy cam of Craig doing medications in his office and also the photos from the other night. I forwarded these to his boss after searching through his desk. Next, I called Hannah and let her know I was about 10 minutes from home. Even though I knew she was flying out the next day, I wanted to surprise her. Looking back at the footage now, I chuckled at the commotion I caused, and I'm surprised I didn't hear any sounds. In a few seconds, Craig came out, half-dressed, and hurried to his car through the back door. It was perfect. As Craig sped away, a police car behind me saw him driving fast and gave chase. After arriving, greeting an excited Hannah, and doing all the couple things, she fell asleep again. On the contrary, I couldn't sleep at all. The next day, she and her friends left in a car. Once they were gone, I had to wait a few hours, but then I started executing my plan. I called my friend, a removalist, and apologized for the late notice, but I needed my place packed and moved. On Friday, after agreeing on a time, I told him he would need to take certain boxes to a storage facility, which he said wasn't an issue. Then, I began packing Hannah's belongings. Later that day, the police called for me to identify if I knew Craig and if I suspected him of any suspicious activities or medication use. Our town took a strict stance on medication law enforcement. I expressed pretended shock and replied no. Turns out they had apprehended the suspect from the previous night with a lot of hard and illegal medications in his vehicle. I grinned, happy that my plan for Craig had come to fruition. By this point, the town was buzzing with news. Events in my hometown don't stay secret for long. Craig was disgraced and promptly fired for medication possession. That night, I went to my parents' house and told them and Hannah's parents what had happened, leaving out certain details, and that I was moving back to the city after being promoted, but Hannah wouldn't be a part of it. They were initially upset that I hadn't kept them informed, but were glad I was handling everything maturely and hadn't stooped to their level, though they didn't agree with ghosting Hannah. After some drinks, laughs, and tears, I went home on Friday afternoon, after a busy week of organizing cleaners for the following week, contacting the real estate agent to put my house on the rental market, and completing various tasks at my hometown's office. I packed some things into my car, drove to my parents' place, said goodbye, and before leaving, I visited Catherine's house. Catherine had been one of Hannah's closest friends growing up. She was the only other person who knew what was happening. Without her help, I probably wouldn't have been able to organize everything as quickly as I did. I gave Catherine a large manila folder with my gathered evidence of her cheating, along with a letter and a few other legal documents from my attorney stating that she was ordered not to contact me and the details of how to access her belongings located at the storage unit I had rented out. After a quick goodbye, I left and drove back to the city. On Sunday, I woke up to several missed calls, voicemails, and text messages. Turns out, Hannah had come home early after being alerted to something being afoot in town, only to find an empty house and a for rent sign out front. Panicking, she went to my parents, who closed the door on her the moment they answered, forcing her to call everyone until she managed to somehow be contacted by Catherine and told that she had a package for her. I heard she didn't handle it well, and I knew this for sure because I got lots of angry texts and voicemails accusing me of framing Craig and being deceitful. I was worried she might come to my front door, but nothing happened. Now, 6 weeks after leaving and getting promoted, I'm content and settled. Second story. I'm a 37-year-old guy, and my wife is 31. A few years back, everything seemed fine, and I thought we were a happy, typical suburban couple. Despite being together for a long time, our marriage was solid. We had an open relationship without any major problems, financially stable, a good bed life, and we genuinely loved and respected each other. We have 2 kids, a 16-year-old girl and a 9-year-old. I believed we had a decent social life, but we hit a rough patch that many married couples go through. Both of us were working long hours, not spending enough time together, which affected our relationship. Also, she started spending more time on her phone, texting her girlfriends. I didn't think much of it until she became overly protective of her phone and started acting distant towards the kids and me. These were warning signs that bothered me. So, I tried harder to be emotionally present, help with household chores, and spend quality time with her. Despite my efforts, the emotional gap between us widened over a few weeks, and she seemed more distant. I discovered the affair on our son's 8th birthday, a night with family, friends, and colleagues. While taking a photo of her, my son, friends, and her parents, a text message appeared on her phone saying, "I love you very much, baby. I miss you." My mind raced as I smiled for the photo. The number wasn't saved, and I realized the affair had been ongoing for a long time. Later that night, I checked her messages, but couldn't find details. Frustrated, I swore to get to the bottom of it. Days later, I came home early to spend time with the kids. While charging their emergency phone, I discovered her Facebook Messenger was still logged in. I found explicit messages and undressed photos between my wife and a guy named Lewis. The messages revealed she didn't love me anymore, criticized our closeness, and planned to leave me for him. It was painful, spanning 2 years. Overwhelmed, I took screenshots and decided to confront her when she returned. A message came in from Craphead, asking if they were still down for the weekend. She replied, "Yeah, honey," the next day. Craphead went on to remind her of the name of the hotel and room number he'd be staying at. Such an idiot. It was music to my ears. I decided to confront her there and humiliate them both. I knew where they would be and what room they'd be staying in. All I needed to do was stage the perfect surprise. I was worried about my kids and the new life that was about to come. She came home from the supermarket. I could hardly look her in the eye, and I didn't want to give myself away, so I went out. I consulted a lawyer, got my options, had a few drinks, and started laying out my plan, sure as hell. The next day, the wife is buttering me up. She says she wants to take a spa weekend with the girls to relax, and when she returns, she wants us to go on vacation, reconnect with ourselves, and focus on our marriage. I go with it all the way. I tell her for sure, of course. It's the most incredible idea she's ever had, and I'll do anything to get us back on track. I talked to my lawyer and asked him to create a strong agreement for our separation, specifying when she should move out, the visitation schedule for weekends, and no child support until the divorce is final. She had no idea this was coming. She got ready, left, and kissed me goodbye, saying she loves me. I told her to have fun, and she left immediately. I went to the bank, closed our joint and money market accounts, and got a cashier's check for her share. I deposited my half into my new account and then went back home. In my office, I printed about 35 pages of Facebook screenshots, killing time because I wanted her and her new partner to get comfortable before I arrived. I also called her parents, inviting them to a surprise. They were worried at first and wanted to know what the surprise was, but I calmed them down and convinced them to come. I managed to contact Lewis's wife through Facebook, and she wasn't that hard to find. I tried calling, but there was no answer. So I drove to her address and explained what was going on. She initially broke down, but agreed to come. We reached the hotel around 12:30, finding her parents already there. We went straight up to their room. Her parents were confused, asking where my wife was and who Lewis's wife was. I calmed them down, and we went to the room. I knocked, claiming to be the hotel manager, and asked to speak with Lewis. He came out in just a towel. I can't forget the look on his face. He went white, tried to talk, but his wife struck him and walked off. He went after her. Then my wife called from inside. I went in with her parents to find my wife in just a towel. She turned white, started to cry, and her mother joined in. I guess she's supposed to be her parents' golden child. She started saying things, claiming it's not what it seems, etc. I told her I'm not here to argue. I handed her the divorce papers and the printed out texts, saying I would email them to everyone we knew and give them to our daughter so she would see the truth about her mother. She broke down, worried about her professional and parental image. I gave her a check for half of the money market account and told her I withdrew my half from all the other joint accounts. It was enough for her to find a place. She started crying more. Her parents were silent and in tears. They went to stand in the lobby. I could almost see the different thoughts and waves of emotions going through her. She asked why I would do this to her, but we both knew she brought it on herself. I told her I expect her to sign the papers and leave them at the house when she comes to get her stuff. I started to leave. I told her she could continue to have fun with Lewis. I left and apologized to her parents. I'm really sorry they had to see this. They understood and advised that we both see a marriage counselor before any decision is made. But my mind is made up. On my way out, I passed Lewis and his wife having a fit downstairs. I smiled a little. Serves the monster right. We exchanged a few heated words. He asked if I'm happy, and I screamed yes. I got in my car. I started to cry, but I managed to pull myself together enough to drive off. I have no idea what she did that evening or over the weekend, but she repeatedly texted and called me asking to talk. I turned off the phone. She came on Monday to talk to the kids, basically saying Mommy and Daddy need some time apart, we still love you, etc. She then apologized some more and said she wanted her family back, but she didn't know what she was doing, etc. I have no intention of ever taking her back. She betrayed me. I also got a call later from Mrs. Lewis. She thanked me for coming to her, etc. And we're very good friends now. She also filed for divorce. I like her. We went to court, and I think the judge felt sorry for me. He asked for statements from the kids and who they wanted to stay with. They both chose to stay with Dad in the house they grew up in. My ex cried when the divorce was finalized. I got the house and had to buy out some of her equity, which wasn't much of a problem. I also got primary custody of the kids. The kids are happy and doing fine. She still calls saying we should get back together, but that is never going to happen. Update. I'm doing well and settled in nicely with the kids. The vibe around the house has been strange lately. The living room, where we used to spend most of our family time, feels like a deserted island now, and even the kids avoid it. I intentionally work late to avoid thinking too much about everything. Though I've been ignoring her, I started implementing some advice I read, the 180, and have been civil, if a bit distant, towards her. I'm glad I made this change because I was starting to feel like a monster for completely ignoring her. It wasn't the right way to behave, and I ended up feeling like I was the one who wronged her. The only time I deviated from the 180 was when I found her crying in the bathroom last weekend. She was there to see the kids, and I helped her up and gave her a hug, though it was more of a comforting gesture than a loving one. Sadly, now I'm suspicious of her motives, thinking she might be waiting for me to come in to put on a performance. I'm completely over my ex, though. She comes to see the kids occasionally, talking about saving the marriage and proving it was just a silly mistake. She looks terrible, lost her job, and her boss fired her after learning about our divorce. I heard she and Lewis decided to stick together for a while, but it doesn't bother me. Anyway, I meant what I said in my original post. Any love I had for her disappeared after reading the hurtful things she said. She's no longer my true love. I see her as trash that needs to be taken out before it stinks up the place. She suggested a compromise in a few months and pushed for couples counseling, but I'm not interested. The thought of spending Christmas with her makes me feel ill. Her friends now share everything with me, and they're on my side. It went badly for Lewis. He had a tough time in his divorce, lost his child, and faced consequences at work. He confronted me, blaming me for his situation, but I laughed it off. He lost his job after his ex-wife exposed everything to his bosses, and I got a restraining order against him. My wife and Louis live together, and I heard he doesn't treat her well, blaming her for everything. She looks pale, has no friends, and sometimes I feel sorry for her. I let her stay overnight sometimes, but I'm always careful. I've been seeing other people, and currently, I'm going out with a very nice lady I met at my party. Friends threw the party to cheer me up after the divorce, and she's the breath of fresh air I needed. We've been going out for 2 months, and she's great with the kids, but I won't reveal her name. I invited her to move in with me. My ex isn't happy and still dreams of us being a family. She keeps begging me to take her back, but like I said, it's not happening. She believes she can win me back no matter what. A few weeks later, I get a call from the lawyer's office. The attorney tells me that my wife is trying to reopen the case, claiming she's pregnant with my child. I'm confused because it's not possible. We haven't been close even before the divorce. She's lying, and the child isn't mine. I share this with my friends, and they reassure me, saying it's just a desperate attempt to reconcile. How would getting pregnant help? It's obviously for Lewis, the guy she's staying with. The lawyer advises me not to worry, assuring me she'll need a paternity test to prove I'm the father. I'm genuinely concerned for her mental health. She should see a psychologist. The next day, she tells my girlfriend she's pregnant with my child and claims to be the mother of my kids. I kick her out, telling her that if she wants to see the kids, they'll visit her place, and she shouldn't come back. She protests, but I stand firm. She refuses a paternity test, but tells everyone the child is mine, claiming I did all this to get rid of her and bring in a new wife. After a few weeks, Louis's wife contacts me and says they're getting back together. She mentions that he's suffered enough and will be moving in with her soon. I inform her about my ex and their supposed baby, and she says they'll figure it out. Louis doesn't hesitate. He leaves my ex and returns home, leaving her alone and pregnant. I feel sorry for her troubles, but she brought it upon herself. I'm considering marrying my new girlfriend, moving away from this house, and starting a new life.
Story 4.
Brad Seaver's life had always been intertwined with the spirit of baseball, but his journey to the big leagues was anything but smooth. Growing up in Davidson, North Carolina, he found solace in the sound of a bat meeting the ball and the cheers echoing from local ballparks. His father, Henry Seaver, a dedicated accountant, supported Brad's athletic aspirations but emphasized the value of education and stability. Henry's insistence on a backup plan meant Brad would split his time between baseball and learning the ropes of accounting at his father's firm. In high school, Brad stood out as a star athlete, forming an inseparable duo with Tim Wilson, the team's elite pitcher. Scouts began to take notice, but when the draft came, Brad's dream to immediately play pro ball was tempered by a harsh reality: no signing bonus and a late-round pick. His father's persuasive argument for college made sense, though it meant deferring the path he had envisioned for himself. At Cleveland Community College, Brad sharpened both his mind and his game, setting the stage for future opportunities. The years at college paid off when Brad's performance led to a better draft position and a significant signing bonus with the St. Louis Cardinals. But fate twisted his career, starting with an unexpected trade to Atlanta and a series of heartbreaks that tested his resolve. Relationships bloomed and fell apart. Successes in baseball were mirrored by personal failures that pushed Brad to the edge. Yet each setback became a lesson, each victory a testament to his relentless spirit. Brad Seaver sat by the window, watching the sun dip behind the horizon. The minutes ticked by slowly as he waited to leave for the stadium. Glancing at the worn gym bag resting near his feet, he opened it to ensure his gloves and cleats were inside. This careful ritual had become ingrained in him ever since they had been stolen during his youth club days. From that point onward, Brad always brought them home after every game, cementing a habit born from that one unforgettable time when he overlooked checking his bag and had to play with borrowed gear, a night that led to a series of fielding mistakes and a frustrating game at the plate. Since then, he never left anything to chance, checking and double-checking his equipment before every outing. After confirming his gear was secure, Brad looked back toward the kitchen. He was grateful Kimberly, his wife, was there. She didn't travel with him as much anymore, and when he was home, she seemed to be away more frequently. Brad never asked her where she went, fearing she might leave him for good. The thought of Kim leaving brought back painful memories of his first marriage. Brad once believed his first wife, Cindy, was his soulmate, but that turned out to be false. Cindy had secretly cheated on him and eventually left to be with her new partner. But when he met Kim, Brad put those dark times behind him. He loved Kim more than anything and refused to think ill of her. When he looked at her in the kitchen, she appeared as beautiful as when they first met, a year after his heartbreaking divorce. After 11 years on the team, Brad felt exhausted. His career had been better than some, but not as remarkable as others. He wanted to retire last year, but Kim had convinced him to sign a contract extension. With a mix of sadness and relief, he realized tonight's game would likely be his last. Although he had 1 year left on his contract, Brad wanted out. Tonight was Game 4 of the World Series, and his team, the Tampa Bay Rays, were trailing 3-0. The series hadn't been competitive so far, with Tampa losing the first game by 7 points, the second by 5, and the third by 11. "Think you'll play tonight?" Kim asked from the kitchen doorway. "No." Brad shook his head. "I haven't played yet, and there's a reason for that. I've had a lousy season. I'm only hitting .209 and have made 15 errors. I haven't played well since the All-Star game. I'll miss playing, but I'm glad it's almost over. Even if I didn't retire, I'm sure the Rays would drop me after this season." "You're not being fair to yourself, Brad," Kim said. "The Rays made the playoffs by a single game. You had 5 key hits in August and September that secured wins. Plus, you saved a game by robbing Robbie Baylor of a home run with that catch in left field. And in Game 2 of the wildcard series, you tied the game with a pinch hit single and the Rays won." "I love how you always defend me," Brad said, genuinely touched by her praise. Still, he wondered if she would push him to play another season. "But let's be realistic. They won't play me. It would be nice to get into at least one World Series game." Kim smiled. "Remember, it's not over until it's over," she said with a chuckle. She loved quoting Yogi Berra's sayings. Brad loved his wife deeply, but her constant absences troubled him. It made him anxious, but he was too scared to ask why. He feared that if he did, she might not come back. With the season almost done, he hoped they could spend more time together. Brad double-checked his gym bag and looked out the window again. The city lights were starting to glow. He reflected on his career, which had been a mix of highs and lows. Brad could have turned pro right out of high school, but chose to enroll at Cleveland Community College in Shelby, North Carolina, for an associate degree in accounting at his father's urging. His father ran a small accounting firm in Davidson, North Carolina, near Charlotte. Brad enjoyed working with numbers and spent part-time hours assisting his father, Henry, mostly during tax season and summers. He prepared basic tax returns and did general bookkeeping. It didn't pay much, but his father allowed him plenty of time for baseball. Brad went to North Davidson High School, where he was one of the team's 2 stars. Tim Wilson, a pitcher, had been on the team since his freshman year and lost only 7 games in 4 years, with 2 of those losses due to errors not of his own doing. Brad was also a starting player and scored 397 points in his freshman season while playing center field. When both graduated, they were drafted by major league teams. Brad was picked by the Cleveland Indians in the 27th round, while Tim was drafted in the 10th round by the New York Mets with a $50,000 signing bonus. Tim signed right away, but Brad received no bonus. He wanted to sign with Cleveland and play, but his father persuaded him to go to college. Henry told Brad he could continue playing baseball while earning an associate degree in accounting. Henry was confident that after 2 years, Brad would be drafted again, but in an earlier round this time. Following his father's advice, Brad enrolled at Cleveland State University, studying accounting and playing baseball. He excelled academically with a 3.8 GPA and hit .407 in his sophomore year. Just as Henry predicted, Brad was drafted, this time in the 6th round by the St. Louis Cardinals. After hiring agent Abe Schultz, Brad secured a $75,000 signing bonus. the Cardinals promptly assigned Brad to the Peoria Chiefs, a Class A team in Illinois. Brad vividly remembered his first day with Peoria, feeling extremely nervous, but the manager, Buck Springer, quickly reassured him. "I know you're probably a bit anxious, Brad," the manager said warmly. "So I'll have you sit on the bench for a few days to get used to how we do things." In the 9th inning of that first game, Buck made an unexpected move and called Brad in as a pinch hitter. With 2 outs and 2 men on base, Brad worked the count to 3-2 before smashing a home run over the right field wall, securing a 7-3 victory for Peoria. As Brad was changing after the game, the manager walked over and patted him on the back. "Nice hit! You'll do well here, kid," the manager said. Brad, still trying to process what had just happened, turned to Ray Swanson, the first baseman in his second season with the team. "I don't get it," Brad admitted. "Skipper told me I'd be sitting out for a few days before he used me." Ray smiled knowingly. "Skipper does that with every new player. He wants you to relax while he figures out where to place you when it counts. He needs to see if you can handle the pressure of playing pro." Brad's brow furrowed. What if I'd messed up? Ray's expression softened. He just wanted to see how you'd respond. You stayed patient and waited for your pitch. That's exactly what he wanted to see. "I think you're going to do well," he said, reassuringly. 3 weeks later, Brad faced the business realities of baseball. He was traded to the Atlanta Braves, who assigned him to their Double-A team in Pearl, Mississippi. This move surprised Brad, given that St. Louis had just paid him a $75,000 signing bonus. He soon found out he was part of a 4-player trade that sent 2 Double-A pitchers and him to Atlanta in exchange for a Triple-A pitcher who was promoted to the majors. St. Louis needed the extra pitching as 2 starting pitchers were on the injured list. Pearl, a suburb of Jackson, Mississippi, was an entirely new experience for Brad. However, he adapted quickly and became a core player. It was there that he met Cindy Bremerton, a classic Southern belle, and they soon started dating exclusively. Brad should have been alerted when Cindy expressed her dislike for Pearl and her desire to leave, but he was too in love to see it. By season's end, Brad and Cindy were married, coinciding with his trade to the New York Mets, who placed him with their Triple-A team, the Syracuse Mets. Initially, Brad planned for him and Cindy to stay with his parents for fall and winter, but when neither his parents nor Cindy were thrilled with the idea, they opted for an apartment in Syracuse. His parents' cold reception towards Cindy should have been another warning, but Brad ignored it. They later admitted they didn't trust or like Cindy. While the fall was beautiful, the winter was harsh. Still, Brad was content, believing Cindy loved him as much as he loved her. Brad then faced 2 tough life lessons. First, he learned that not all wives are faithful. Second, he realized that in pro baseball, value is determined by batting averages and slugging percentages. Spring training went well, and Brad felt secure in his spot. As the season progressed, he remained with the Syracuse Mets, even after roster changes. In the first 2 months, he wasn't a regular starter, but often came in late for his defensive skills and as a pinch hitter. At that point, Brad was hitting .254 with 3 home runs and 17 RBIs, and he hadn't made a single fielding error. In early June, Tim Wilson, his high school teammate and a Mets pitcher, arrived in Syracuse to rehab a broken left index finger he injured in a clubhouse fight. As a right-handed pitcher, the injury wasn't serious, but he was placed on the injured list for 3 weeks and sent to Syracuse for conditioning. On Tim's first day back, Brad invited him over for dinner, where he met Cindy. Brad, being naive about romantic advances, missed the clear signs that Cindy was pursuing Tim. 10 days later, Tim returned to New York to rejoin the Mets. Over the following 5 weeks, Cindy would occasionally take their car and disappear for a day or two, refusing to tell Brad where she had been and becoming angry when he asked. One day, Brad came home to find Cindy sitting with her packed bags and divorce papers. She had emptied their checking and savings accounts and taken all the jewelry he had given her, including the diamond engagement ring that had belonged to his grandmother. Her trips had been to New York to see Tim, and she planned to move in with him and marry him once the divorce was finalized. Cindy seemed to enjoy humiliating Brad and was as cruel as could be. "You're such a fool, Brad," she sneered. "I only married you to get out of that backwater town in Mississippi. I never intended to stay with you." Brad fought back tears. "I thought we loved each other." "Don't be naive," Cindy snapped, thrusting the divorce papers into his hands. "I'm going to succeed in this world, and you won't. Tim told me that management doesn't believe you'll ever make it to the majors. They're keeping you on the team for a couple of years, hoping for a trade. If that doesn't happen, they'll cut you loose. Brad watched Cindy carry her suitcases out of the apartment and out of his life. The worst part was that Brad believed her. The word devastated didn't come close to describing how he felt. He'd only had 2 serious relationships before marrying Cindy, and even though he had ended one of them, he took both breakups hard. Losing Cindy to Tim pushed him into deep despair, and his performance on the field plummeted. 2 weeks after Cindy left, the Syracuse Mets demoted Brad to their Binghamton Rumble Ponies team. After 2 days in Binghamton, Brad was ready to quit baseball and go home. Luckily, Binghamton's manager, Roy Miller, knew how to handle young players. He had seen it all: homesickness, substance misuse, preppy attitudes, and broken relationships. Roy convinced Brad to stay for 2 weeks and encouraged him to turn his sadness into anger directed at his soon-to-be ex-wife. Roy also helped Brad find a lawyer who got Cindy to return half of the withdrawn money and convinced her to give back the engagement ring. Brad funneled all his anger and energy into baseball. Over the next 2 weeks, he hit .394 with 4 home runs and 19 runs scored. By the end of the 2 weeks, Brad was fully invested in the game again. He finished the season with a .313 average, 19 home runs, and 43 runs scored. That winter, the Mets traded him to Detroit, which initially upset him. However, after speaking with his agent, Brad realized that Detroit planned to start him with their AAA team, the Toledo Mud Hens. It was in Toledo that he met Kimberly Anna Samuels. She was working at the hotel where Brad checked in upon his arrival. Kim had emerald green eyes and silky brown hair pulled back into a ponytail. Brad had initially been rude to her when she explained that the hotel offered a 1-week discount for Mud Hen players. Brad, still harboring anger and bitterness, treated her poorly. Kim's smile faded as she apologized and returned to her work. For the first time since Cindy left, Brad felt guilty about his behavior. After a few awkward minutes, Brad muttered an apology, admitting he was in a bad mood. Kim's smile returned, and she mentioned that most players find their own apartments or move in with teammates after the first week. During the first few days of practice, Brad concentrated on his batting and fielding. Yet, he couldn't stop thinking about Kim. He found reasons to visit the front desk whenever she was working. On his 5th day in Toledo, Brad arranged a room with Tyler Wilson, the catcher, but he stayed one more night at the hotel. Before checking out, he asked Kim for her phone number and a date. She happily agreed to both. When the Mud Hen season began, Kim sat in the wives and girlfriends section at Fifth Third Field, their home stadium. Brad was amused by the stadium's name, imagining what had happened to the first 4 Third Banks, until a reporter explained it came from the merger of Fifth National Bank and Third National Bank. Kim became a fixture at Brad's games, always sitting in the same spot. Their relationship blossomed, and Brad would look for her before each at-bat, sharing a smile and a wave. Brad had an impressive season, with 298 runs scored, 94 RBIs, 29 home runs, and a league-leading 6 triples. With 2 weeks left in the Major League season, Brad was called up to Detroit's main team. Unfortunately for Kim, the final 6 games of the season were on the road. Brad performed respectably, making 3 substitute appearances, recording 1 hit in the 8th inning, and playing left field for defensive purposes. He even managed to throw out a runner attempting to go from first to third on a blooper between him and the center fielder. A month after the season ended, Brad and Kim got married. They rented an apartment for a month and began their life as newlyweds. Soon after, they had to leave their place in Toledo and move to an apartment near Comerica Park in Detroit. Brad began spring training with the Tigers, and when the final team selections were made, he became an official Detroit Tigers player. Brad played for Detroit for 6 seasons, with his best performance in the 6th season when he had 281 at-bats, 94 RBIs, and 22 home runs. He also earned a Gold Glove, achieving a .998 fielding average, and was named to the All-Star team. Brad knew, however, that his selection was due to the rule requiring at least 1 representative from each team, and since Detroit lacked standout players, he was chosen. Brad was content with his life, even though he and Kim discovered she couldn't have children. It was a tough blow for both, but they moved on and focused their attention on their nieces and nephews. Brad had both a brother and a sister, while Kim had 3 brothers. During the winter following his 6th season, Brad was informed by the Tigers that he had been traded to the Tampa Bay Rays. While Brad felt saddened to leave the Tigers, Kim was thrilled at the prospect of moving to Florida. The next 4 years brought success for Brad and Kim. Brad maintained a batting average around .270 and primarily played right field, occasionally switching to left. After his 4th season with Tampa, Brad began considering retirement. He felt it was time. But Kim didn't want to hear it. Brad often wondered if Kim simply enjoyed the status of being a baseball player's wife too much. She denied it, but Kim did make a valid point. The Rays had a strong chance of reaching the playoffs and possibly the World Series. Playing in the World Series was a dream for any professional baseball player, which led him to sign a 2-year contract. Despite that, Brad knew he could retire after one season if he wanted. The first half of Brad's 11th season was decent, but after the All-Star game, his performance started to decline, and by the end of September, he found himself benched. But as Kim reminded him, the Rays had made it to the playoffs and were now in the World Series. Brad checked his gym bag again and looked over to the kitchen where his wife was still busy. He hoped she'd come by after the game. With a sigh, he picked up his bag and stood. "Do you have to go?" Kim asked as she entered the kitchen. "Yeah, it's time to get this over with," Brad replied wearily. "Just remember, it's not over until it's over," Kim chuckled. "Right," Brad replied with a smile. "And when you reach the fork, pick it. Love you, baby." "I love you even more, baby." He kissed her, their usual goodbye ritual before a game. When Brad went onto the field for warm-ups, he was happy to see that the stands were already packed with Tampa fans. Yet a part of him felt sad knowing he would miss the game after retiring. Fox's World Series coverage commenced. Chip Fair began. Chip Fair here with play-by-play alongside Steve Ember as color commentator. We're in Game 4, bottom of the 9th inning. The Rays were hoping for a comeback. Steve took over. Leading 2-0 in the bottom of the 9th, they managed to get 2 men on base with no outs. But the Dodgers brought in their ace, Scott Sharman, who struck out the first 2 batters. Now, the Rays are down to their final out. Jose Antonio, who's batting .282 and has a .346 average against Sharman, steps up as Sharman prepares to pitch. Chip continued. First strike on the count. "Sharman's been dominant all season," Steve added. "With 35 saves and a 1.94 ERA, he's formidable. But if anyone can stand up to him, it's Antonio." Sharman pitched, and Jose fouled the ball off his ankle. "Ouch, that's painful," Chip commented. Steve interjected. "It's not just a minor hit. Jose is still down, visibly in pain. The trainers are out now, checking his foot and ankle." "That's not good," Steve sighed. "They're calling for help to take Jose off the field. Hopefully it's just a bad bruise, but we'll see." "Who will Joe Torrance send in to finish this at-bat?" Steve wondered. This is a tough spot. Making the final out of the World Series is any player's worst nightmare. "There's movement in the Rays' dugout," Chip said. "It looks like Brad Seaver has been chosen for this near-impossible situation." "I'm surprised by Joe's choice," Steve admitted. "Brad hasn't had a strong season, hitting just .209. He does have 6 pinch hits this year, including one in the postseason that tied a game the Rays won. But this is still a challenging spot for anyone, especially someone who's struggled lately. The series could end right here." Brad stepped into the batter's box as Sharman readied his pitch. The ball came, and Brad swung and missed. "Wait," Chip shouted. "It was a tricky curveball, and the catcher couldn't hold on to it. Brad's still in this." "Sharman winds up again," Chip continued. "Brad connects with the fastball, but it doesn't have enough power. He's fighting like a climber, holding on by his fingertips." Scott pitched again, and the count went to 1-2. The crowd collectively held its breath. 9 pitches later, Steve leaned into the microphone. "This has turned into quite the battle, hasn't it, Chip? Honestly, I thought Sharman would take Seaver out quickly and the Dodgers would win the series in 4. But Seaver is fighting till the end." Dodgers manager Mattis made a quick visit to the mound to speak with Sharman. After a brief conversation, Sharman returned to the mound, signaled, and delivered the next pitch. Brad connected, sending the ball into the screen behind home plate. "On paper, this matchup is completely uneven," Steve commented. "But Brad Seaver won't go down without a fight. A solid hit could clear the bases, and even a single could mean a win." Sharman, looking tense, took a deep breath and glanced at the runner on third before throwing. Brad swung, and the ball met the bat with a resounding crack, flying deep into center field. "It's a long fly ball to deep center," Chip shouted, his voice brimming with excitement. "Rodriguez is at the wall. He leaps, but it's gone. The Rays win! The Rays win! The Rays win!" The crowd erupted as Tampa Bay players stormed out of the dugout and surrounded Brad as he stepped on home plate. The stadium was a sea of noise, with fans standing, clapping, shouting, and waving in sheer joy. A surge of adrenaline and relief swept over Brad as his teammates crowded around him. 10 minutes later, as he was about to leave the field, he scanned the stands, but Kim was no longer there. In the clubhouse, reporters bombarded Brad. "Were you expecting that curveball?" one asked. Brad, sweat dripping from his face, shook his head. "I don't try to guess pitches. I'm not good at it. I just focus on protecting the zone. On that hit, I had to widen the zone because I didn't want to hit it near the corner. I was lucky it wasn't one of Scott's best curveballs, and I made good contact." Another reporter asked, "What do you think of the Rays' chances in tomorrow's game?" "Well, the next game starts at 0-0, so we have as good a chance as the Dodgers," Brad said with a modest smile. "And one more thing. People predicted the Dodgers would sweep us at the start of the series. That's not happening now, and that feels great." About an hour later, Kim appeared in the clubhouse, eyes shining with pride. She rushed over and hugged Brad, her voice filled with excitement. "I'm so glad you agreed to the contract extension," she said. "You've always dreamed of playing in a World Series game, and now you've done it, and even won. I'm so proud of you, and I love you more than I can say." Brad's heart swelled. That night, for the first time in weeks, he slept soundly with Kim beside him, but when he woke up in the morning, she was gone again. Where could she be so early? He wondered, a familiar worry gnawing at him. At the stadium, the locker room had a noticeably different energy, more relaxed, confident, and energized. Brad was surprised and humbled to see his name in the starting lineup, playing right field and batting ninth, which was usually reserved for the pitcher. But since it was an American League park, a designated hitter was allowed. As the national anthem played, Brad glanced into the stands and saw Kim taking her seat. He tried to wave, but she didn't seem to notice. Fox's coverage of Game 5 opened with Chip Fair and Steve Ember at their usual spots. Managers Tommy Mattis and Joe Torrance have exchanged lineups. Luis Javier has finished warming up, and the Rays take the field, Chip announced. Tampa started Game 5 on an upbeat note. Ronnie Collins hit a single, followed by another from Corey Williams. When Brad stepped up to bat, the crowd erupted in cheers. "Listen to those Tampa Bay fans," Steve said, noting Brad's confident approach to the batter's box. Brad took a deep breath, feeling calm and focused. 4 pitches later, the count was 2-2, and Brad stood steady and poised. Chip's voice grew with anticipation. "Here comes the next pitch." Brad swung, sending the ball soaring deep into right field and landing it in the upper deck. The stadium exploded with excitement as Chip shouted, "That ball is gone! Brad Seaver hits a home run, extending the Rays' lead." "Seaver! Seaver! Seaver!" chanted the crowd. Brad, grinning with joy, gave a quick wave from the top step of the dugout. He's given the Rays fans plenty to cheer about these past 2 days. In the bottom of the 5th inning, the Rays loaded the bases with no outs. "And now Seaver steps onto the field," Chip announced as the stadium erupted. Fans were on their feet, stomping, clapping, and cheering at full volume. Steve chuckled. "I wonder if Brad still has some magic left." "I'd wager Johnson isn't too happy to see him in this situation," Chip replied. "Definitely not," Steve continued. "But Mattis is sticking with him and letting Johnson pitch to Seaver," Chip resumed. "Johnson is set. Here comes the pitch. First ball." 2 pitches later, the count was 2-0. Scott interjected. "Johnson's really cornered himself here. He's being too cautious with Seaver, and now the count is 3-0 with no room to put him." Chip described the scene. "Johnson has the ball, steps on the rubber, shakes off 2 signs, and now he's ready. Here's the pitch." There was a crack of the bat. "A sharp hit down the right field line," Chip shouted. "It veers to the corner and takes an odd bounce." Steve followed up. "Matthews is racing for the ball, catches up and makes the relay to second base. But 3 runs have already scored, and Seaver stands at third with a stand-up triple." "Well, would you look at that?" Steve chuckled. "Seems Seaver's magic is still going strong." 3 pitches later, Thor Grundle strikes out, Chip announced as Thor walked back to the dugout. "Next up is Roger Danby. He hit only .257 this season, but his on-base percentage was .364, which is exactly what you want from a leadoff hitter. Not to mention he led the team by reaching base 14 times on defense," Chip continued. Scott added, "He's a scrappy player who battles at the plate and tests the speed of the pitchers." "Bold or reckless, depending on your perspective," Chip remarked. "Johnson checks Seaver at third and winds up," Chip said. "Here's the pitch." "It's a long fly ball to center," Scott called. Donner moves back to the warning track and makes the catch. "Seaver tags up and heads home," Chip reported. The Rays extend their lead. The inning concluded when Bobby Sheffield grounded out to shortstop, bringing the game into the 7th inning. "Torrance has decided to swap out Grundle for Randy Mixon," Chip informed. Grundle leaves the game after 6 scoreless innings and 4 strikeouts. A solid performance. Scott provided context. Mixon's record this season is 5 wins and 4 losses. He's more of a middle reliever, but if he can hold off the Dodgers for 2 innings, the Rays can bring in their closer, Jason Marino. That's likely Torrance's strategy, Chip confirmed. But the Dodgers' top lineup is coming up, starting with Sammy Bills, who holds a .294 average as their leadoff man, Scott pointed out. They call him Flamethrower for good reason, Scott said with a grin. He's built for power and speed and isn't shy about playing aggressively, already involved in 2 hard slides this season. Mixon winds up as Bills settles into the box. First pitch is low and away for ball 1, Chip narrated. Scott commented, "Not sure what Mixon's plan is, but staying on the outside might be a smart move." Mixon winds up for the next pitch, Chip continued. Bills lines it straight up the middle for a single, Scott said. Now stepping in is Thad Thorne, who's had a phenomenal season with a .310 batting average and 39 home runs, Chip noted. 4 pitches later, the count was even at 2-2. Mixon checks Bills at first and throws, Chip said. Thorne smashes a liner into the gap between center and right, Scott followed. Bills rounds second and heads for third, Chip called out. Seaver fields it cleanly and fires it to second, Chip added. Thorne slides in and is safe, Scott confirmed. Seaver's throw to second was closer than I expected, Scott commented. His defense has stayed sharp, even during a batting slump, Chip said. But now the Dodgers' bats are heating up. Thad Blanken is up next with 2 balls and no outs, Scott pointed out. Mixon's facing real pressure now, Chip observed. Torrance is heading out to talk to Mixon, Chip added. Will this brief meeting change anything? Chip asked. Doubtful, Scott said. Mixon's fastball and curve are solid. You may be right, Chip noted as Torrance returned to the dugout. Mixon will now face Blanken, one of the Dodgers' most dangerous hitters, batting .347 with 49 home runs. And Blanken's career average against Mixon is .427. The Rays aren't taking chances. They're intentionally walking him to load the bases, Chip reported as Blanken jogged to first. Ray Freeman, the cleanup hitter, steps into the batter's box, Chip continued. Mixon's first pitch is a strike, Chip said. A double play would be a game-saver here, Scott added. Let's hope so, Chip responded. Freeman swings and taps a slow roller down the first baseline, Scott described. Mixon rushes in, barehands the ball, and only has time for the out at first. The throw is on time, but Bills scores easily from third, Chip concluded. The Dodgers put their first run on the board with runners on second and third and 1 out, Chip narrated. As Hector Aponte prepared to step into the batter's box, Scott smoothly transitioned. We'd like to remind our listeners that Brandon Ford on East Atomo Drive is offering 0% interest financing on all new and used vehicles. Aponte is ready in the box and Mixon is set, Chip resumed. Mixon will need to be cautious here because Aponte is a reliable hitter with only 36 strikeouts this season. 3 pitches later, Aponte worked the count to 2, one with 1 out and 2 runners on base. This is where Aponte thrives, Scott noted, glancing at his laptop. Chip added, he'll be looking for a pitch in his wheelhouse. If it's not there, he'll wait it out against Mixon. Mixon winds up and delivers. Aponte swings and lines a single into right field, Chip called. Thorne scores easily, and Blanken is being waved home, Scott said. Seaver picks up the ball and fires a strong throw to the plate, Chip described. And Blanken is out, Scott exclaimed. What a throw by Seaver. That play wasn't even close. With 2 outs and a runner on first, Jordan Donner steps into the batter's box, Chip continued. Mixon looks a bit shaken, Chip noted. Catcher Jimmy Fox goes out for a quick chat to settle him down. 4 pitches later, Chip announced, Mixon walks Donner, putting runners on first and second with 2 outs. Torrance seems to be making a move, Chip said. He's signaling to the bullpen, and right-hander Greg Cole is coming in. It hasn't been a great season for Cole, Scott pointed out. 3 wins, 6 losses, and a 5.12 ERA. But he's been better lately, Chip added. He earned a save in the wild-card game and another in the ALCS Finals. This pitching change is sponsored by Roger Harper's Steakhouse, located just outside the stadium. Enjoy top-tier filet mignon, ribeye, New York strip, or porterhouse, all cooked to perfection. And don't miss Ladies' Night on Thursdays. Any woman accompanied by her husband or boyfriend gets her steak free. Plus, there's a 2-for-1 happy hour from 5 to 6 p.m. As Cole completed his warm-up, Ray Matthews approached the plate. Cole delivers the first pitch, Chip narrated. It's a deep fly ball to left field, Scott said. It bounces off the wall. Both runners, already in motion with 2 outs, score. Aponte crosses home and Donner rounds third, bringing in 2 runs as the relay throw is cut off. Scott commented, "The Dodgers are showing signs of life, adding 4 runs in this inning. The Rays need to be careful, or they might lose their grip on this game." With 2 outs and no runners left on base, the Dodgers brought in a pinch hitter. Danny Cruz secured the final out to end the inning. Chip concluded, "The Dodgers have narrowed the score to 7-4, but their momentum could carry into the next inning." In the bottom of the 8th, Bobby Sheffield hit a double to right with no outs. Brad followed with a single, bringing Sheffield home. He then stole second and advanced to third on a deep shot to right field, later scoring on another hit. Post-game wrap-up, the Rays were relentless, Chip reported. They scored 9 runs on 12 hits, and Brad Seaver was outstanding with 7 RBIs, a run scored, and an incredible throw that took down Blanken at home. It was an impressive performance by the Rays, Scott agreed. Tomorrow is a travel day, as the series moves to Los Angeles. Pre-game coverage begins at 8 p.m. Eastern with Game 6 starting at 9:05, Chip said. "Thanks for joining us, and don't miss Game 6 of the World Series." The Rays typically didn't allow wives on the team plane, but with the series shifting, they lifted the restriction and offered seats to any wives who wanted to fly. Most agreed, but Brad wasn't sure if Kim would join. The plane departed for Los Angeles 3 hours after the game, making for a long overnight flight, but the team agreed that arriving early and resting for a full day was worth it. Brad sat in his seat, watching to see if Kim would arrive. He'd searched for her after the game, but found she had already left. Memories of his first marriage came back to him. With Kim absent, Brad took 3 aspirin for his headache and fell into a deep sleep. After arriving at the hotel, Brad managed to get 4 more hours of sleep before heading to Dodger Stadium for practice. The workout was light and relaxed. That night, Brad went to bed early and woke up feeling refreshed but still uneasy about Kim's absence. He couldn't shake the worry about where she was. When Joe announced the lineup, Brad felt relieved to see his name in right field, batting 8th. The tension among the Dodgers was palpable and evident throughout the game. Fox Sports Game 6 recap, what an unexpected turn of events. The Rays have tied the series at 3 games each, Chip said excitedly. Brad Seaver led the way once again. After his pivotal pinch hit in Game 4, today he doubled in the 3rd inning, setting up the Rays' first run and later scoring when Thor Grundle singled to right. Scott chimed in, "Grundle hasn't had many hits this season, so that was a significant moment." The Rays held their 2-0 lead until the 6th inning when everything started to fall apart for the Dodgers, Chip continued. The Rays loaded the bases, and Seaver walked on a wild pitch before hitting a double to center that drove in 3 runs. Sheffield followed up with a single that brought Seaver home, and Roger Darby's hit into right field added more pressure. The Rays extended their lead to 7-0, Chip reported. At that point, the Dodgers manager decided to bring in Tito Velez, their second-best pitcher, with 21 saves and a 2.33 ERA, Scott noted. But a defensive miscue turned what could have been a double play into just outs at first and third, allowing 2 more runs to score and pushing the lead to 9-0. The Dodgers did manage to score when Freeman hit a homer to left with 1 out, Scott noted. Seaver added another single in the 9th, but was left stranded, Chip said. The Rays secured a 9-2 win. Now it all comes down to the 7th and final game of the series. Join us tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Eastern for the pregame show, with Game 7 starting at 9:05. For Fox Sports, this is Chip Fair and Steve Ember. Thanks for tuning in. After the mandatory locker room interviews, Brad returned to his hotel room to grab an ice pack for his head and neck. He ran a bath and sank into it to relax. 20 minutes later, he heard someone in the other room. Just as he was about to get out, Kim entered and smiled at him. Brad felt surprised, but relieved. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" she asked warmly. "Like an old man," Brad replied with a faint smile. "I'm completely worn out. I'm going to take some aspirin and head to bed." "Good idea," Kim said, following him to the bedroom. She stayed by his side as he took 3 aspirin and a sleeping pill. Kim sat with him until his breathing became deep and steady. Then she quietly left so he could rest. Brad slept for 10 hours, but woke up still feeling tired, although his headache had subsided. Kim was right there as he stirred. "How are you feeling today?" she asked, concerned. "Still like an old man," he said, smiling, happy to have her there. He didn't care where she had been. Her presence was what mattered. Once the season was over, he promised himself they would spend more time together. But a nagging fear crept in. Was she waiting for the season's end to leave him? Brad didn't feel like eating, so they spent a few hours by the pool before he took a nap and headed to the stadium. The clubhouse buzzed with excitement, though it did little to shake Brad's fatigue. He wasn't at full strength, but felt better than the previous night. The final game of the series threw the sports world into a frenzy. Dodger Stadium filled up well before practice, with scalpers reportedly charging $2,000 per ticket. Brad had to cut his practice short when his headache returned. Sitting by his locker, he took his usual 3 aspirin and leaned against the metal wall. He considered telling the manager about the headache, but decided to wait until the lineup was posted. If his name was listed, he'd choose whether to play. His teammates came by to thank him for his contributions and assured him they wouldn't let him down, making it clear he couldn't sit this one out. When the lineup was posted, Brad saw his name in right field, batting 8th. The decision was made. He would play. 9th inning. This has been an incredible pitcher's duel, Chip said as Andy Pitts walked to batter. Dodgers pitchers Kodai Tanaka and Tyler Bowen held the Rays to 1 hit, while Rays pitchers Jack Sullivan and Gavin Miller limited the Dodgers to 2 hits. Now the Dodgers have brought in Tito Velez for the 9th. They're saving Charman in case they take the lead, Scott noted. Velez throws the first pitch, fouled off to left for a single, Chip narrated. Pitts takes a step off, but stays as Aponte fields it to second base. It looks like the Rays might try to advance Sheffield, Scott suggested. That would be smart, Chip agreed. Sheffield squares for a bunt but misses, strike 1. Velez throws again, and Sheffield bunts but misses for strike 2. With 2 strikes, will they let Sheffield swing? I'd make him hit, Scott added. A swing could end in a double play. Here's the next pitch, Chip said. Sheffield bunts it down the first baseline. Velez leaves the mound but only has time to throw to first. The Rays now have a runner on second with 1 out, and Brad Seaver is up. Seaver's bat has been quiet today, Scott said. He's grounded out and struck out in his 2 appearances. He doesn't look great. 2 pitches in, the count was 0-2. Seaver looks uneasy, Chip observed. Velez pitches again, Chip said. Seaver taps a weak grounder between first and second. Bills and Thorne charge, but it slips through for a single. Matthews picks it up as Pitts is waved home. Pitts slides head first and is safe. The Rays take a 1-0 lead, Chip shouted. 2 pitches after Brad's hit, Chip continued. Pinch hitter Cleon Johnson steps up. He swings at a fastball, grounding to shortstop, flipped to second, and fired to first. A double play. Now the Rays are just 3 outs from one of the most remarkable comebacks in World Series history, Chip declared. The Rays led 1-0 going into the bottom of the 9th. Chip began describing the scene, but no one anticipated how the game would end. In the top of the 9th, the Rays secured their lead when Pitts singled, Sheffield advanced him to second, and Brad's hit drove him home. But now they faced the top of the Dodgers lineup. Sammy Bills walked, and the next batter hit a double off the left field wall. Thorne walked on 4 pitches, and Blanken was hit by a pitch, loading the bases with no outs. Ray Freeman drew a walk on a wild pitch. He then hit a sinking line drive, and every Rays fan must have felt like the World Series was slipping away. But Brad Seaver sprinted forward, dove, caught the ball just before it touched the ground, rolled over, and fired it to Williams at second base. Williams stepped on the bag and tagged out the runner from first. A triple play. It was only the 2nd triple play in World Series history, the last one completed by the Cleveland Indians in 1920. This was nothing short of a miracle. The Tampa Bay Rays were crowned world champions. Your thoughts, Scott? Chip asked his co-commentator. Scott paused, a nostalgic smile on his face. Ever since Brad hit that game-winning homer in Game 4, one scene keeps playing in my head. It's from the 1980 Olympics when the U.S. hockey team faced the Russians. With less than 10 seconds on the clock, Al Michaels shouted, "Do you believe in miracles?" Yes. Do we believe in miracles today? Absolutely. Yes, Chip added, pressing his finger to his earpiece. Our producer has just informed me that the voting for Series MVP is in. And, in a surprise to no one, the unanimous choice is Brad Seaver. In fact, he would have been chosen even if the Rays had lost. Scott nodded, admiration evident on his face. What a series for Brad Seaver. In 10 games, he had 8 hits, 2 home runs, and 14 RBIs. He now holds the record for the highest batting average in World Series history at .800. Back in the locker room, Brad answered every question from the reporters. Champagne was poured over his head repeatedly, and he was embraced by teammates, coaches, and even the team owner. But his mind was somewhere else, on Kim. She hadn't been at the stadium, and he could only hope she would be waiting for him at the hotel. After hours of interviews and celebrations, Brad showered and took a cab back to the hotel. His heart raced as he opened the door, only for his hopes to crash. Kim was not there. Brad waited into the night, his anxiety growing with each passing hour. But Kim never came. By morning, as the team prepared to fly back to Tampa, she was still absent. She didn't join the return flight either. At the start of the season, Brad had told Kim this would be his final year playing baseball. He wondered if that decision had driven her away for good. Arriving at Tampa International Airport, Brad was met by a huge crowd of cheering fans, which lifted his spirits momentarily. An even larger crowd awaited at the stadium when the team bus pulled in. But when Brad walked into their apartment and found it still empty, the loneliness hit him hard. Tears welled up, and he let them fall, accepting that she might have left for good. The next day, Tampa Bay officials hosted a victory parade downtown. Fans lined the streets, waving banners and shouting in celebration. But for Brad, the joy felt empty without Kim there. The following morning, Brad's agent called with news of a 3-week promotional tour. The schedule was packed, leaving little time for anything else. After a week, Brad had had enough. The tour felt hollow without Kim, and he was exhausted. Back home, Brad unlocked the apartment door to find it still and silent. The air felt stale, as if untouched for days. He glanced around and saw that nothing had changed. Sighing, he grabbed a cold beer from the fridge and sipped it slowly. The thought of staying there alone was unbearable. He decided he would head out to the farm, a 22-acre property with a farmhouse and a vegetable garden, long wilted for the season. It was the only place he thought Kim might be. Halfway through packing, the phone rang. His heart leaped as he hoped it was Kim. He snatched the receiver. "Hello?" he said, voice tight with anticipation. "Brad, I'm glad I caught you." The voice on the line wasn't Kim's. "This is John Walker." "Mr. Walker," Brad said, masking his disappointment. "I wasn't expecting to hear from you. Are you upset I left the tour? I couldn't keep up with the pace. It was too much." "No, Brad," John's voice softened. "I'm not upset at all. I understand how exhausting that can be. I called to see if we could meet tomorrow morning, say around 10. That works. I'm heading to my place near Arcadia, so it's not far to stop by your office." The next morning, Brad arrived at the Rays office at 9:55. He was shown in to see John Walker, who stood up, smiled, and extended his hand. "Thanks for meeting with me, Brad." They shook hands as John continued. "First, congratulations on an amazing World Series. You've become a living legend whether you realize it or not." Brad shifted uncomfortably, blushing. "I'm not so sure about that." "Take a seat." John gestured to the chair in front of his desk. "I wanted to offer you something special, a new 2-year contract with a significant raise." Brad was taken aback, and for a moment the room spun. He took a deep breath, shook his head, and spoke. "I'm sorry, Mr. Walker, but I can't accept." John's brows knit in confusion. "Brad, I understand the regular season wasn't what you hoped for, but this contract includes a player-coach role. You're one of the best outfielders and base runners around, and not many can hit like you. We want you to help guide the younger players and stay part of the Rays family." Brad's eyes filled with tears as he dropped his gaze and shook his head. "There's a reason I can't do it. I have a brain tumor. It's inoperable. I found out just before spring training." His voice broke as he added, "I'm sorry I didn't tell the team, but I wanted one last season." John's face turned pale, eyes widening in shock as he reached out and touched Brad's arm. "Oh my God, Brad, I'm so sorry. Have you gotten a second opinion? I can connect you with top surgeons." Brad nodded slightly, still looking at the floor. "I've seen 3 different doctors, including Dr. Steinman. One of the best brain surgeons in the world. They all said the same thing. The tumor is deep, and removing it would liquidate me. They said I had about a year left. That's why I can't sign a new contract. I won't make it to spring training." Tears welled up in John's eyes, and he blinked rapidly. "Is there anything the team can do for you?" Brad stood up slowly and extended his hand. "No, I've made my peace with it." John hesitated, then walked around the desk and hugged Brad tightly. As the embrace loosened, Brad's thoughts drifted to Kim. If only he could find her, he'd feel truly at peace. But before he could take another step toward the door, a sharp pain surged through his head, and everything went dark. When Brad opened his eyes, the sterile smell of the hospital filled his senses. He saw wires connecting him to various machines and heard the steady beeping of a heart monitor. His vision cleared, and he saw her. Tears filled his eyes as he looked at Kim sitting beside him. She was here, and that was all that mattered. "You came," Brad said hoarsely. "I was so afraid you'd left me. I love you so much." Kim leaned forward, her eyes glistening. "I would never leave you, Brad. I love you more than you know. I waited for you. But now you need to let go and come to me." Brad's eyes fluttered shut, a soft smile on his lips as the beeping turned into a shrill alarm. A code blue was called, and the medical team rushed in. They worked for 15 minutes, but the machines went silent. Brad Seaver was gone. "Did anyone tell Mrs. Seaver?" one nurse asked, slightly out of breath. Mary, the head nurse, placed a hand on her arm. "Mrs. Seaver couldn't have been here. She died in January from cancer." The sports world was stunned and heartbroken when the Rays announced Brad Seaver's passing, but no one mourned as deeply as the Tampa fans. The Rays front office quickly organized a public viewing at Tropicana Field, where Brad's casket lay in state. By 6 a.m., crowds had already gathered, and by 7, police estimated the line stretched over a mile long. The gates opened at 7:30, and as the day wore on, the line continued to grow, forcing authorities to close roads and redirect traffic. The stadium was surrounded by flowers, banners, and signs expressing love and gratitude. With special permission, the viewing hours were extended until 2 a.m., with portable lights illuminating the grounds. At 2:30 a.m., police began ushering people out, and by 4:45 a.m., the gates were closed. The funeral procession started at 10 a.m., taking Brad's body to Memorial Park Cemetery, where he was buried beside Kim. On the day of the first home game of the new season, Tropicana Field was packed. The American flag, World Series championship flag, and team pennant were lowered, remaining folded. After a brief speech from the team owner honoring Brad's legacy, all 3 flags were unfurled. When the pennant opened, it displayed Brad's number, 23. The crowd erupted into a chant that resonated through the stadium. "Seaver! Seaver! Seaver!" It continued for 5 minutes. In February, the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown opened an exhibit dedicated to Brad Seaver's outstanding World Series performance. A 15-minute highlight reel set to music was so popular that it played every 20 minutes for the first 6 months. Cindy, Brad's first wife, had led a chaotic life. After their divorce, she married and divorced 4 more times, each relationship marked by substance misuse and turmoil. When she learned of Brad's World Series triumph, she became fixated, watching every game. News of his pass away devastated her, and she had to be sedated. Cindy later visited Brad's grave, leaving a single red rose before disappearing from public view. What happened to her after that remained unknown. In his final moments, Brad found peace with Kim, who had come to guide him. In the end, nothing was more important than being with the woman he loved, even if only in spirit. Together, they found eternal rest beyond the pain of this world.